Good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us today as we meet for the inaugural symposium on homelessness and poverty. Today is a very important day. Today we will have a very critical discussion. But before we do, I would like to take the time to introduce myself and so you know who's standing before you. I'm Patricia Robinson, and a little bit about my background. I've spent 20 plus years working in the media broadcast industry as an executive working for Hot 97, 98.7 KISS, KISS FM, C101.9 as a vice president of human resources and community engagement. In addition to that, over the last 7 years, I've been running parallel tracks, working directly for Colin Kaepernick as his director of community outreach for his Know Your Rights camp, where we did some really groundbreaking impact work across the country. So spent a lot of time doing community work across the country. And it was very telling and appreciative. Today, after the pandemic, in 2022, I shifted my energy and my talent to serve in my community in which I live. I live in Queens, and I was hired recently in February of 2022 to work as Chief Administrative Officer for Greater Jamaica Development Corporation. If you don't know, it's been in existence for about 55 years. We're celebrating 55 years tomorrow. And we do groundbreaking work there, Urban Economic Development Corporation, a CDFI. So I'm really excited to see my talent in that space. But I also hold a couple of other roles because I believe that the gifts that God gives you, you should not waste them, you should share them out. So I do teach on the weekends as a professor at Westchester Community College. And also how I came here today is I currently have a show on 94.7 FM. So if you tune in on the radio on Sunday at 8:30, I have a public affairs show. So what are we going to do today? We're going to tune in when? Sunday at 8:30, right? Very important, right? Very important that we are having real important conversations that matter. I can tell you from my experience, I just turned 53 2 days ago. Thank you. Yeah. All right, we got a couple of minutes to the mirror gets in, so if you want to sing to me, it's okay. All right. But just really important that you understand, I was born and raised in New York, and I understand the issues of New York. I understand how important it is. So while I sit in positions where I'm sitting at C-suite tables and sitting with high-level professionals, I'm also a person that will put on my sneakers and boots and get on the ground and do the work. So I'm really excited about being here today because this is an important conversation. And I do hope that today that you are not only just here to participate, but that there is an intent to actively listen and an intent to actively commit to an action that you will take to be a part of the solution. There is a solution, and all roads should lead to access. I'm going to say that again because I truly believe that. All roads should lead to access. So I am honored today to be your mistress of ceremony. We have some incredible and dynamic speakers, subject matter experts. My question to you is, what do you want to take out from this conference today? Outside of just listening to people, I want you to think about that. That's really important. These are real issues. There are people who are suffering. We watch it every day. It does not just live around us. It impacts us. It's not their matters. It's our matters. And we have to figure out how we change this. We have to be a part of it. We cannot be afraid of this. That's the real important conversation today. So amidst all of the jest here, it's really an important situation. So thank you, Commissioner, for even putting this conversation together. I'd like to introduce the Commissioner of the Department of Social Services, and the reason that I'm standing before you today, who's doing incredible work. Welcome, Gary Jenkins.
All right, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
The energy in this room feels so freaking good. It really does. Someone said I need to bottle it up, so every Monday morning when I come in, just open it up so I can feel the energy of today. So I'm going to say welcome, and I am very excited that you have joined us for our inaugural DSS Poverty and Homelessness Symposium. Beyond poverty, real solutions, real people. We are gathered here at 4 World Trade Center, the DSS administrative headquarters, and I hope you enjoy our wonderful view. It was raining earlier, but I knew the sun was going to come out, right? I knew it was going to clear up, just because today is an important day. So, This symposium represents a diverse community of people united by a passion for finding solutions to the problems of poverty and homelessness. Thank you for being a thought leader and participant in the necessary work for our clients who have experienced poverty and homelessness firsthand. Today, you will hear from subject matter experts, executives from the business community, leaders in the philanthropic community, and elected officials. But perhaps most importantly, you will hear from individuals with lived experience. This administration takes great pride in providing individuals with lived experience with opportunities for participation as equals in the process of solving problems that affect them. Before I go any further, I want to give a few shout outs, because you know I have to our incredible partners. First and foremost, a special thank you to the mayor of this great city, Eric L. Adams, who has charged us to get stuff done. Yes. And eliminate silos. And a special thank you to Deputy Mayor Ann Williams Isom, who will join us later today. Her unwavering dedication to eradicating poverty and her commitment to moving the needle to end homelessness is beyond reproach. I'm blessed to report to such a phenomenal and caring leader. Do you agree with that, Commissioner?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you to the mayor's chief of staff, Frank Carone, who called me and said he's running late because he's out in Queens. But I want to thank Frank for his advocacy for DSS, for the clients, and for being a terrific thought partner. And I'm proud to call him my brother. Thank you to the mayor's chief advisor, Chaplain Dr. Ingrid Lewis Martin, who's on her way, for being here, for her support and guidance in more than mere words can describe or express. Thank you to my colleagues, all the commissioners, Danhauser, Noel, Howard, but especially my sister Cortez Vasquez. Give her a round of applause, please. For being here today and for your commitment to breaking down silos and working together to solve our city's toughest problems. A special thank you to Moya Commissioner Manny Castro for being here today. Amid the asylum seeker crisis, your compassion and leadership were on full display for the nation to see. I'm thankful to have such a caring, thoughtful, and compassionate colleague and friend. And thank you to Chief Jason Wilcox and Chief Benjamin Gurley for being here today on behalf of Commissioner Sewell and the NYPD. Thank you for your partnership. Thank you for your true partnership. NYPD's willingness to listen and lead has been critical as we do the work of moving unsheltered New Yorkers off our streets and subways. And thank you to the MTA and to MTA Chief Safety and Security Officer, Pat Warren, for being here today. Our partnership with the MTA is critical as we work together to keep our public transportation system safe and affordable for all. Thank you, Pat. Thank you to the OTDA Commissioner, Dan Teets, for being here today, along with Barbara Gwen, my friend, and Cheryl. Thank you so very much for being here supporting me. I also like to give thanks to both HRA and DHS administrators, Lisa Fitzpatrick and Jocelyn Carter, for your brilliance, your thoughtful leadership, and your fierce loyalty. And a special shout out to my first Deputy Commissioner, Jill Berry, for all that you do for me, our clients, our staff, and our city. Thank you to Senator Fassard for being here today. We are so fortunate to have you in Albany. Thank you to every frontline staff person who works for our agency. Nothing would move without your commitment and dedication, and I see you every day. And while I won't name all of you, I'd like to thank our providers and community partners for your commitment to serving New Yorkers in need and your willingness to step up time and time again. And I know what some of you are thinking. Really, Commissioner, beyond poverty? Why is the theme of this symposium beyond poverty when you know poverty will be among us? I believe the persistence of poverty is not a reason to ignore the plight of the poor. On the contrary, we should be steadfast in our desires to assist them. We know that poverty persists. For example, 63,000 New Yorkers, including 20,000 children, are sleeping in the DHS shelter system tonight. Visits to New York City food pantries and soup kitchens are up 69% in 2022 compared to 2019, and up to 14% just since January 2022, when inflation costs began to send food prices soaring. Yes, we have challenges, and poverty and homelessness are chief among them. But our theme is beyond poverty, not because we are any closer to solving it, but because we must elevate our thinking beyond our current horizons. Poverty and homelessness are related in many different ways, such as poor health, food insecurity, lack of safe and affordable housing, lack of access to meaningful jobs with living wages, raising costs due to inflation, and exposure to violence, racism, and discrimination. If our goal is to truly solve poverty and move the needle on homelessness, we must think beyond poverty and include the full experience of being a human being in all its complexities. The challenges, some of which will be discussed in this room today, that low-income and homeless New Yorkers face are many, but so too are the opportunities. I cannot discuss the challenges and opportunities without discussing our recent asylum crisis. As has been widely reported in recent months, New York City has seen a substantial increase in the number of families seeking asylum. The crux of individuals and families entering shelters, city shelters, put great stress on our system, but it did not break us. We were able to withstand the stress and provide shelter to thousands of asylum seekers who needed our support, our care, and our compassion. The seekers needed, again, I want to say this again, the asylum seekers needed our support, our care, and our compassion. The humanitarian emergency put our work on full display for the world to see. And what we showed is that our city, we are going to do everything in our power to make sure every New Yorker, no matter how new they are, have a safe place to sleep at night, clothes on their backs, and food to eat. To the Department of Homeless Services staff and to our provider partners, many of whom are in this room, thank you for rising to the occasion when our city needed you the most. But I'm not surprised. Our staff and our provider partners always rise to the occasion. Such is the case with our work to bring in unsheltered New Yorkers off the streets and subways. Earlier this year, Mayor Adams announced an historic investment of $171 million for the Subway Safety Plan and Street Solutions. This investment is intended to fund 1,400 beds, which represents 1,400 additional opportunities to bring unsheltered New Yorkers into a service-rich environment that can meet their needs. And we have started to see the results from our efforts and investments. Since the launch of the Mayor's Initiative, more than 2,800 New Yorkers experiencing unsheltered homelessness have come into shelters from the streets or subways. I expect a round of applause there. Our work to keep New Yorkers sheltered is critical, but so too is our work to address poverty and prevent homelessness on the HRA side, especially now as New Yorkers contend with the highest inflation rates in 4 decades. Rents are up and grocery bills are sky high. I often say that HRA has nearly an $11 billion budget and DHS has a $4.4 billion budget. But despite the enormity of the HRA budget, I am seldomly asked to discuss HRA in its broad range of programs and services. HRA services and programs are critically important. As a child growing up with my family, we relied on HRA programs and services to help us through the hard times. But these programs and services aren't just important to me personally, they're responsible for keeping our city affordable and economically and racially diverse. I'd like to mention a few of those programs now. Cash assistance to meet basic human needs. As of September 2022, there were 435,000 people and approximately 240,000 households receiving cash assistance. Our rental assistance to prevent and reduce homelessness since 2014, we are very proud to say that DSS, HRA, and DHS have helped more than 197,000 New Yorkers secure housing or remain in their homes. Our SNAP program, formerly known as food stamps, provide us food assistance to over 1.7 million low-income New Yorkers. And our emergency food assistance to food pantries, and community kitchens to fight hunger, New York City increased its investment in community food pantries by adding $30 million for emergency food in fiscal year 23 and 24 for shelf-stable and fresh food purchases and delivery of the Community Food Connection Program, bringing the total budget to a record of $54 million. Thank you, Mayor Adams. Fair Fares to provide low-income New Yorkers with assistance for their transportation costs. There are currently approximately 270,000 individuals enrolled in this program. Services and emergency shelters for survivors of domestic violence and supportive housing, a model of affordable housing for New Yorkers in need, equipped with on-site supportive social services. We are happy to report that we have fewer than 900 vacancies, down from around 2,500 vacant units earlier this year. And at DSS, we're steadily innovating and expanding our programs and services. The city recently launched a pilot program which provides a direct pathway to supportive housing for unsheltered homeless individuals without a detour into our shelter system. And DSS is making other reforms too. Earlier this week, Mayor Adams announced a series of sweeping changes to City for HEPS programs to help New Yorkers access high-quality housing more quickly and stay stably housed. We have great confidence that the changes in the City for HEPS program will expand eligibility, encourage employment, and increase client choice and flexibility. We listen to our clients, and we are responding to their needs. As winter approaches and the threat of COVID-19, RSV, and the flu continues to loom, we must take great care to continue to safeguard our clients in shelter and limit the spread of airborne diseases and viruses. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Our city's recovery over the last 2.5 years wouldn't be the same without the commitment and expertise of our dedicated staff and providers who were on the front lines during the pandemic's peak, supporting New Yorkers in need. Over the last few years, our systems have been greatly tested. But with the support of folks in this room and my tremendous colleagues at DSS, HRA, DHS, we have risen to the occasion. As a city, we know we have more work to do. The discussions held in this room over the next few hours are meant to illuminate the challenges faced by low-income New Yorkers, but also opportunities. In addition, we hope that with courage, creativity, and sharing our presenters over the next few hours, we can start to change the way we talk about poverty, expand our way of thinking, and commit to including those who experience poverty and homelessness directly in all our efforts. Let's move beyond poverty, and let's do it together. Thank you.
At this time, I would like to welcome to the stage, although he missed my wonderful introduction, the 110th Mayor of the City of New York, Mayor Eric Adams.
Thank you so much to our team members that are here, and I believe the conversation is going to be a rich one with Rich Dury. Good to see you, Rich, Senator Prasad, and Christine Quinn, Daniel. It's good to see all of you that are here. In the book, New York, New York, New York, a woman comes up to Mayor Koch and said, Mr. Mayor, can you make the city work again? And Mayor Koch looked down at her and said, man, this city never worked. And the problem is that we have normalized that dysfunction, and we've reached a point that we are really unafraid to talk about the fact the city has never worked. In cities across America, they have never worked. And I just refuse to act like they are. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has a quote that I live by. We spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them to fall in the first place. We have a downstream national mindset. We hang out downstream, we wait for people to fall in the river, and then we pull it out. Because people are making so much paper for pulling people out of the river. That's the whole game. And so when I talk about the things that we're trying to do, I'm impacting how people make paper. And that's why I'm going to be a target as long as I'm the mayor of the city of New York. Because don't tell me you have 30% of the inmates at Rikers Island are dyslexic and you were not doing dyslexia screening in schools to stop them from going in. And the reason was, look at who we're pulling out of the river. Black, brown immigrants. Go to your homeless shelters. Who's in there? Go to Rikers Island. 80% of the inmates don't have a high school diploma or equivalency diploma. 48% have learning disabilities. 58% have mental health issues. But people are eating off of feeding Rikers Island. From the food that's made, cleaning the clothes, cleaning the hallways. People are making money. Foster care. We had the audacity to state that we were going to allocate money for foster care children so that they can go to college. $15,000 we're paying them $60 a day for their expenses because we knew 600 to 700 foster children were aging out every year. We knew it. We knew they were less likely to graduate from high school, more likely to be unemployed, more likely to have mental health issues, more likely to be the victims of crimes and participate in crime. Yet 600 to 700 age out every year that was going into the criminal justice system downstream, and what were we doing? Nothing. That's why we invested in Fair Futures, because we realized that if we give them life coaches until they're 26, they're more likely to graduate from high school instead of dropping them off at 21. I was still calling my mother at 51. And so when you do a real analysis of how we're running the cities, you start to realize that, hey, something is wrong. Something is wrong. And there is no urgency to fix the problem because those who are impacted by a failing city and cities look like me. Dyslexic, arrested, rejected, now I'm elected. The mayor of the city. So what does that mean? I encourage everyone to read the book Moonshot. It's a powerful book. In the book, in the last chapter, they talk about Henry Ford. I don't know if Henry Ford made this quote and attributed to him. He stated that if I would have asked people, they would have said build faster horses instead of building cars. We have a faster horse mindset. We have to think differently. The globe is changing around us, and government is still stagnant. The government is afraid to get out of these different blocks. We talk to each other. We have to have a different mindset. This is no longer a faster horse mindset. Industries are using new technologies and ways of doing things, but we're still stuck. If you look at the first telephone that was created by Alexander Graham Bell, and look at what children were doing during that time, sitting in the classroom, and then you fast forward to see how the telephone has changed to the iPhone, but then you look at the classroom, and the students are still doing the same thing. We were preparing students for the Alexander Graham Bell instead of the Steve Jobs. We got to change how we're doing all this stuff. And we got to think differently and be bold enough. And so what? You make a mistake. That's what you're supposed to do. You show me a person that did not make a mistake, and I tell you a person that didn't do anything in their life. You go to Webster and look at mistake, you're going to see my face in there smiling. I made errors, but I'm the mayor because I was not afraid of those errors. And so as we have this conversation about homelessness, about ending poverty, We need to think differently. We need to be bold enough to first really believe we could. Because I really don't believe many of us believe we could. We talk a good game, but do we really believe it? Do we really believe it? You know, they laughed at us, Ingrid, 30 years ago when I said I was going to be mayor. But we believed it. We believed it. And people can tell if you believe. Young man stopped me the other day and he dropped out of school. I said, why did you decide not to go? He said, I don't believe my teacher believed in me. People in homeless shelters, they can tell if you really want them to have a pathway. What you're doing, Christine Quinn, with those women is amazing when I went to visit them. They believe we care. We got to believe we care. But that's what this administration is about. It's about thinking differently. It's about believing we care. Gary Jenkins lived in a homeless shelter. Come on. So he knows what it is. We have an administration of people who believe. We believe every day. We believe. And we're going to fight for it. And so we're not going to always get it right. But I'll tell you something that's wrong. In January, when I went out in the dead of winter and went inside those encampments and those tents, and I sat down and spoke to people, and I saw human waste in the tent, drug paraphernalia, stale food, mental health issues. I know it was wrong if I would have been a man and continued to walk past them and act like they didn't exist. I know it was wrong when I got on the subway system in February and I saw people sleeping under stairs inside the tunnels in cardboard boxes. I know that was wrong. I know it was wrong to act like we did not see people. And I also know it was wrong that every time we talked about building housing for people like that, the people who were yelling the loudest were standing up and saying, you can build it, but don't build it on my block. You know? I know that. You would be amazed at how many elected officials call us to talk about housing, but block every attempt we put in place to build that house. Got to start exposing folks. And we have to start being honest about this conversation. Because we're going to give it all we have. Everything we have, we're going to give. Wayne Gretzky, they called him the Great One. And he said the first time he lost the Stanley Cup, he went into the locker room of the opponent. His locker room was yelling and arguing and screaming and saying who was right and who was wrong. He went in the locker room of his opponents and he noticed that it was quiet. Thought they went home. He peeked inside and he saw them all on the bench. Bloody, bruised, banged up. They left everything they had on the ice. 3 years and 2 months. I'm going to leave everything I have on the ice. That's what I'm going to do at the Mayor of the City of New York. Thank you very much for hosting me.
Thank you all for continuing to sit here and take all of this wonderful information and vibrancy in. We are about to jump into the first panel. So we're going to invite subject matter experts up, and this panel will be focusing on solving homelessness, strategies and policies that work. Well, you will hear about homelessness and poverty. They'll come together to discuss the strategies to hopefully end this. So I would like to introduce, I'm just looking in the order that they're sitting. Okay, we have Daniel Teets, who is the Commissioner of the OTDA, Office of Temporary Disability Assistance. We have New York State Senator Roxanne J. Prasad, if I'm saying that correctly. Diana Ayala cannot make it today. We have Richard Brewery, who's the CEO of Robin Hood Foundation, and this panel will be moderated by Chris Quinn, President and CEO of Quinn.
Oh, thank you. Well, first of all, I just want to, before I start moderating, I make a promise to try to not interrupt the panelists, but I'll probably break it. Because worse than a politician with a mic is a former politician with a mic. You know what I mean? I don't get it as much. But I want to also start by thanking the mayor for having been here. You know, a mayor, we all know, has an incredibly busy schedule. So for him to spend that much time with all of us on a week when he had already done a homeless thing. So I have no doubt the schedulers were like, you want to do a second homeless and poverty thing? That's too much. He was here, and means a lot. And I also think it means a lot based on the respect he has for our Commissioner Gary Jenkins, who I've only met since he started, but proud to call now a friend and a colleague in this work. So thank you very much. All right, so we have some questions here, and the first one goes to you, Richard. Will you be increasing WIN's grant? But in some of Robin Hood's other work that is also important, you know, you and your staff did a report and a study that showed, to no surprise, poverty is a condition in this city and really in this country, a condition that affects African American, Caribbean, Latinx people more than white people, and women more than men. And we know that, but sometimes you have to do a report to show the doubters the real facts, right? I mean, it makes you crazy, but you have to do that. So now that we know what we know, what do we do? What do we do?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Chris, and talk to me later about the grant. Good to see you all. Commissioner, I've known you before you had this job and only admired you more for your leadership. So I appreciate you. Thanks for having me here. And great to be here with this panel. I would not be called an expert sitting with these three people, but I appreciate the chance to be here. So as you said, Robin Hood, so just as folks, I'm sure folks know who we are, but we are a foundation whose mission is to elevate New Yorkers out of poverty. And for the past few years, we've issued a report called the Poverty Tracker, where we interview a few thousand New Yorkers who have lived experience with poverty, New Yorkers who are living with hardship. And we interview the same New Yorkers every quarter to really help us understand their experiences, both as a tool for advocacy, as you say, sometimes to state the obvious, but also to help us understand and to help drive our grant-making strategy. And as you said, surprise, surprise, poverty and race are deeply intertwined. So the question you asked is why that is. I don't think I really need to, I think, give this room a lecture on the history, but you know, fundamentally the reason why race and poverty is intertwined is because that's the history of America. The history of America beginning with slavery, theft of labor and capital from enslaved Americans through centuries of disinvestment in education, disinvestment in housing, strategies that have been designed to separate Black people and people of color from opportunity, even things seemingly innocuous as transportation policy, used effectively over centuries as a tool to destroy thriving Black communities, to separate communities from opportunities, to invest in some communities and to disinvest in others. So, you know, we are where we are because of that history. So, you know, I think for us at Robin Hood, and you know, what I would say to all of us as a city is that if you want to solve a problem, you have to solve a problem. And so I think part of our charge is, first and foremost, to name that history and to use that history to drive our policy-making interactions. I think for all of us, our charge as a city should be to, as we engage in public policy, to be at the center of every policy and understanding of the racial implication of that policy, and to hold us all accountable in everything we do for making sure that we are addressing the fundamental barriers of racism that leave us where we are. And so just if I were to be a little bit more practical, I think what we understand is that fundamentally, I think part of what we have to do is that we have to treat people fairly. And so I think the main thing I would say, if we think about what does it mean to have a strategy that understands the nature of race and poverty, is to affect policy that treat people fairly, including treating workers fairly, making sure that people who have a job can earn a living. As we said, you know, poverty is a problem fundamentally of money. We know that the average black worker, hourly worker, earns 20% less than the average white hourly worker. That as long as that exists, you will continue to have a racial element of poverty. We know that even earning minimum wage isn't enough to keep you out of poverty, that you have to work 3 full-time minimum wage jobs to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in New York. Fundamentally, as long as that's the case, we're going to have a system that treats people without fairness and dignity. We know that you think about some of the critical job sectors like childcare, restaurant workers. These are jobs that are overwhelmingly Black and Latino, and they also happen to be jobs that don't have basic minimum wage protection. So again, as long as we have policies that don't pay people fairly, we're going to be in this place. Another thing that I think about a lot, and I think we should all think about, is just we understand. I think you were saying, Commissioner, that we don't have to live in this reality. The tragedy of the whole question is that we actually know what works. We have a strong sense of the things that work to help people in poverty, including providing cash supports for those who are not working, who do not have a job that pay a living wage. And one of the great stories of the last few years is sort of the real living experiment we've had in seeing how these investments, everything from unemployment insurance to child tax credit, how all these things helped reduce child poverty, I think by 60% just in New York alone. But yet we now have to fight to recover these things that we know work, and sort of really leading the charge to make sure that the child tax credit in particular is restored. So I'm just really looking forward to this conversation. I really appreciate what you said, Commissioner, what the mayor said, that at the heart of this is really a question about our commitment to ensuring that all New Yorkers have access to the dignity and the opportunity that they deserve, and making sure that we are looking at upscale solutions. We talk about homelessness, trying to understand why we are here. And I'm excited to have that conversation with you all.
Thank you very much, Richard. And listening to you, I was thinking, upon entering WIN shelters, and we house 10% of all the homeless families in the city, 32% of our homeless moms are working. 32%, and they're in shelter. Eventually goes up to 52% upon exit, but that really speaks to how hard it is to get a good job in New York City nowadays. And we're lucky that in the reforms that were announced earlier this week, we had a situation where if both members of the couple were working minimum wage jobs full time, they were making too much money to get a voucher. Not anymore. That's a great thing. And also, the commissioner has taken down the work hours that are needed for homeless families for the parent to qualify for the voucher, because in addition, another thing that contributes to homelessness and this poverty is that it's almost a full-time job being homeless. There are so many appointments that you have to go to, so it can be at times impossible to work full-time. And then just lastly, it's so connected, right? It's not just work, it's education, it's childcare, it's a childcare voucher. So thank you for reminding us of that. And we're very lucky today to have 2 of our great state leaders with us. I wish the Capitol wasn't in Albany, but I'm grateful that they are there. First, we have the chair of the Senate's General Welfare Committee, chaired by a Democrat, is a great thing, Roxanne Prasad, who not only brings government experience to the chair, she brings Brooklyn to the chair, which you know what that means, and brings her whole life's experience as a very significant activist in her community. So thank you for that. And Dan Tietz, the commissioner of OTDA, which he could tell you what that stands for, because I've never really known, but I can tell you. It's like the New York State Dorm Authority. They don't bring, but they never built a dorm in their life, but they were really important. OTDA, we don't know what it stands for, but they're really important. And I'm very grateful to Dan for his work in government, because he comes from decades and decades of work in advocacy, and making that jump is not always supported by your brothers and sisters in the advocacy community, as the senator knows also. So thank you. And for both of you, the question is, what do you see in this legislative session as the top things that you'll put on the agenda to help alleviate poverty and homelessness across the state? Because both of you have that impact to make it not just New York City.
Well, thank you, everyone. Commissioner, see you leaving, but thank you.
I'm not leaving.
The commissioner here is not gonna like what I'm saying because I'm always bugging him and his team. But when the session starts, actually before session starts, we will begin to talk about what are the things that are needed to lift people in New York State out of poverty. And we have to first look at our education system, right? If we're not giving the people across the state the educational foundation that's needed, they will remain in poverty, right? So we have to look at how we're funding education. Last year, we decided we're fully funding education across New York, but we still have more to do. We have to also ensure that, you talked about families with a couple, they're both working, they're doing minimum wage jobs, and they're making too much money. We're looking to see how can we change those laws. Too often someone making $1 over the goes over the cliff, and they're losing everything. Those are things that we have to look at in New York. We have to look at the benefit cliffs are ridiculous. It's no fault of the commissioner or any of the agencies. It's just the laws that we have in place, and it's time that we start looking at the laws that we have in place and see how is it affecting people. Are we a state that we have laws in place that continue to keep people in poverty? As the chair of social services, my commitment is to lift people out of poverty, making sure that their lot in life is far greater than when I first walked in. And we have not done that. We have not done that. We continue to place money because we think that by placing the money there is what we need to do, but that's not what it is. We have to have holistic conversation and look at the root causes of poverty, of homelessness, of the inadequate educational system, all of those things, and then make solid laws that changes the status quo in New York State. Too many people. I came from a school this morning where 35% of the children in that school are living in a homeless shelter. That is wrong. In the state of New York, that is wrong. Those are things that we have to look at. How do we change that? And changing that starts with this symposium that we've decided to have. Because, I said to someone, today we're going to use the word real a lot. It starts here. This is a real conversation. And too often, we've been afraid to have the real tough conversation. Because we think that when we have those conversations, people will come after us. And they do. You heard the mayor say, when we want to place a shelter, our responsibility is to ensure no one in the state of New York sleeps on the street. That is our responsibility as government. And we've fallen asleep on that. When the mayor said there are people who talk the talk about, oh my gosh, there's so many homeless people. But when you say we want to place a shelter in a community, they say, not here. The NIMBY factor kicks in. I was in a community board and never once did I ever vote against a shelter in the community. You know why? Because the person living in a shelter could be your sister, could be your brother, and it's also your neighbor. It's your neighbor. That's a real person. And that's why when we go to the commission and says, these are the things we need to look at, is because we are looking at people as real as possible. And so I'm going to take that, turn it over to the commissioner.
We haven't compared notes yet, although we're scheduled to compare notes.
We are.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate it, and thank you to both Rich and the Senator for being here today. I want to turn back just a little bit, though, to something that both Commissioner Jenkins and the mayor referenced, which is this idea that we're just doing the go along to get along. You didn't use those words, I did. And that somehow we can't solve poverty, and I completely disagree. Rich heard me say this at the first Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council meeting a few weeks ago. We absolutely can solve poverty. We actually know how to solve poverty. We know what to do. This is a matter of commitment and resource. our budget and policy priorities, what are those? We can fix this. We can absolutely fix this. We don't have to carry on as though this has to carry on. And so I really appreciate folks pushing on this. That's what our job is. And I will say that I feel lucky to work for a governor who I think shares my view, or maybe I share hers. I'm not sure which way that goes. But and I guess the other thing I would say is that New York City and New York State are not alone in this. New York City may be largely a collection of islands, but it's not an island. It's not, it's part of a country that also needs to make this commitment. And I appreciate the current administration in Washington's willingness to give a lot of resource where we didn't get much in the past, and to be willing to step up. Now, we need them to step up in other ways, and I won't list them all here today, but I think housing policy is one big one. Since the Reagan years, we have a fraction of what we had in terms of Section 8 vouchers and support for affordable housing, both in capital and in operating, a fraction of it. Again, this is solvable. We have to commit the resource. Just in terms of our policy priorities, I'm grateful that the governor got reelected, not least because I still have a job. But I would say that that in this budget, I think it's going to be a little tighter, and I think probably it's true for the state or for the city as well. That said, I think we are very well positioned to do a couple of important things that will follow on some of what got done in last year's budget. So for the first time in many years, there was a change in public assistance that let folks earn more dollars and not face that cliff in quite the same way. We'd like to do more on that to make sure that people have the opportunity to grow their income without losing everything in terms of assistance and support. I think that there's a very good chance we're going to do something on tax credits. So we had a great national experiment that ran, unfortunately, for only about 6 months. That by itself, that child tax credit reduced child poverty, I think, in the range of 40 to 50%. Now, we had every Republican in Congress, literally every one, and maybe one Democrat who seemed to think that his state didn't need it. So we don't have that tax credit anymore. But it was a great demonstration of how, when you give poor people money, they're not poor anymore. And we can make that difference here, and I think there's a very good opportunity. It's on our agenda, and I'm hopeful that we're going to get something there. We also recognize housing costs, and we recognize that the shelter allowance is on the table here too as something that needs to be looked at very, very carefully. And I'm hopeful that in this coming session that will also be part of the agenda. So there's just a couple of items that I think we're looking at that can make a real difference in the lives of many New Yorkers who are in need.
That does deserve a round of applause. Senator, you kind of previewed the next question, which is, look, we need to build more affordable housing. There is no question about that. But we also need to build shelters. And folks who say the answer to homelessness is affordable housing, that is true, but the housing can't go up overnight, right? So there needs to be a place for people to be in the interim. And we also need to note the opposition for affordable housing and supportive housing, which I always thought people would be happy to be getting, because I'm so happy when I hear it, but they're not. So for all three of you, what is your strategy or strategies to deal with and push back on that community opposition when it comes up?
I think we have community opposition when we talk about affordable housing because it's not really affordable. That's bottom line. And we say affordable, but then we have to define what affordable is and affordable to whom. That's our major problem. In my community right now, we have many housing projects that are considered affordable, but the people who've been living in those communities can't afford it. And so that's where our problem is. What I am looking, I've spoken about this before. I said we have a voucher system where we're offering people who are in need of housing, this voucher system, I know the mayor has changed the city's program, but homeowners or landlords in general are leery of taking our vouchers. We have to look at those programs in its entirety. And when we go back to Albany, one of the things that I've been talking about as the chair of social services is asking that we change the way voucher systems are administered. We have to look at, because we need to get as many people as possible in home housing, right? Where there's a need for shelter, yes, but we need to have people in permanent housing also. And so when we're giving a voucher and it says the tenant is responsible for X amount, it varies. The homeowner, the landlord, is not willing to take that voucher because they're saying if the tenant cannot pay me as a homeowner, I'm left hanging. The city isn't gonna make me whole. The state isn't gonna make me whole. What I've said we have to look at our program and say, we are the responsible party. Let us be responsible for making the homeowner, the landlord, whomever whole. Let the tenant be responsible for paying this into the city or whomever our partner we're creating for them to be paying. So the landlord is not going to say, I'm not going to get my money, so I'm not going to take a voucher. Those are the things that we have to look at. How do we have to look at changing our voucher system? I know what the mayor's, that's something totally different, but that will go a long way in allowing people to be in permanent homes.
I think that's right on, and I also think the conversation about changing what's affordable in a neighborhood, based on different programs. What do you think? I think those are the right messages. What do you think a right message is when it's a shelter?
A shelter is needed. It's how you come into communities and have the conversation. That's what drives whether the people will say, okay, we're good with it, or we're not going to do this. Too often, when a shelter is placed in the community does not have a say in it. There's no real conversation. So the shelter is placed, and then the community is told, well, according to the law, you have to have a shelter. But really, it's not. There's no equity in how shelters are done across the boroughs. There's none. If I'm living on Staten Island, I'll say, like, you're not coming in here, and they'll be like, okay, we're gonna move it. If I'm living in East New York or Brownsville, they're like, you're getting a shelter. And they'll be like, oh yeah, we have to have a shelter. You have to take the shelter. You have no say about it. We have to change the conversations that we're having with communities when it comes to bringing shelters in. Shelters are a necessity. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. They are needed. But we have to make sure the community feels that it's a partnership. I've gone to the ones you brought, and the community understand they have the conversations. I've asked shelters when they come in, create a community advisory board so that you can have those conversations. Too often, that's what causes the pushback. We're not having conversations with communities, and we need to change that.
I think that is spot on, and let me just say, come March, maybe April, who knows with construction, Wynn will open its first shelter on Staten Island. And it wasn't pretty, but we went to every town hall meeting, for hours and hours. One lovely gentleman asked for my home address. I gave it. They never came, though I thought they would. All right.
Aren't you the lucky one? They came to my house.
That's a great segue because I think that's exactly right. So as some folks here may know, I used to have to do this for a living.
We did one together.
Which is to try and sell shelter to communities that didn't want it or thought that they didn't want it. Or at least some folks in those communities thought they didn't want it. I would say that in every community we've ever gone to, there are actually some good and decent people with open hearts who are willing to have this conversation, who are willing to entertain it. So I just to follow on from what Senator Prasad said, I think there's a bunch of things. So the starting place, of course, at least in New York City, is there's a right to shelter. So the good news would be there's no ULURP. The city has never lost a lawsuit. And I guess I'm kind of the, take a baseball bat to your knees Democrat. So I'm kind of of the mind that, you should do what you need to do here. Folks need to be served. I think there's lots that we can do to make siding of shelters better than they may have been in some points in the past. So that means being responsive to community concerns. I think DHS has oftentimes and probably continues now to have those conversations with community to say, here's the population, here's the adjustments we can make, we need to open this shelter, but here's maybe the population that gets served, maybe the services that are there, maybe there's community outreach workers, maybe there's better lighting, maybe there's better physical plan. There's all these things that you know, Chris, from your time at WIN, that you can do to be responsive to the community's concerns, to lessen the impact, to lessen the burden, to be a good neighbor. And I also think it's the type of project. So I think ones that mix shelter and maybe senior affordable, maybe supportive, maybe permanent housing of another kind, but on a project that maybe targets 30% of those units for the lowest income folks from that community. Like, there's a bunch of things that we can do to make those projects more attractive and responsive to the communities in which they live. But I also completely agree that there needs to be shelter in every community district. There needs to be shelter in every county across the state. It doesn't work quite the same way outside of New York City for reasons not worth going into here today. But I think that our regs run right up to the point of requiring that kind of equity all across the state, and I think that's important. That for reasons we all understand here, homeless folks come from every corner. People fall in hard times, and what they need is assistance and support, and we should find a way to give it to them in a way that's equitable and fair in response to their needs and response to the community's needs.
Rich?
Yeah, I first of all, I completely agree with both those perspectives, and add maybe two things. One is, I think even with all that you both said about the need to engage communities in a meaningful way, it's also true that there are communities and community leaders for whom justice, reason, and logic will not be enough. And so at the same time, we need to do all that you said, but we also need to do, which is also what you said, which is at some point, leadership. Leadership has to operate in a way, as you said. So I would just maybe put a little underline on that point, and that sometimes that will mean fighting through community opposition to do what needs to be done. And part of it, I think, is really about the stories that we tell about people. Because again, just to go back, these are people, and the homelessness crisis is at its heart an affordability crisis.
Yeah.
And ultimately, everybody in the city understands that housing is expensive. And so the only other thing I would say here, and again, it's not really answering the question, but back what you said before, is just it's also can't separate these questions about deciding shelters to the fundamental questions about what does it take to prevent homelessness in the first place and promote affordability. And so one is just to, again, applaud the changes in city perhaps that which I think actually will go great way forward. I think there's more to do, absolutely, but it's a great way forward. I know that you have been leading efforts to make sure that non-citizens have eligibility. I think that's an important part of this piece. I think making sure that we know, again, because it's an affordability problem, you shouldn't have to be homeless first to have access to the supports. We know that if you provide financial assistance to someone in housing before they are homeless, you can save money, time, space, and maybe have a few fewer fights and trauma. And so again, the 90-day, there are things that we can do to make sure that we are not forcing people to go into crisis before we start dealing with the crisis. Just going back to what the mayor said, which is that you have to work upstream. So anyway, I mean, there's a lot to do here, but I do think we're moving in the right direction. And again, I think continued political leadership to make sure that we continue to drive in the right direction. Maybe the last thing I would just say is just on housing court, making sure, right now, providers just do not have the capacity to provide representation. And we know that we have better outcomes when people in housing court are represented. So again, advocacy on the state level to make sure that we are slowing down the pace of evictions so that legal services providers have the capacity to meet the needs and to have a fairer system of adjudication. Again, these are things that actually everybody will win in the long term. The landlords will win, the tenants will win, the city will win, because we have few people in crisis. And as great as the work you do, and we support the best, and the reason why we support you, in many ways we've lost already by the time anybody comes to your doors. And so making sure that as we fight for more shelter, that we don't lose track of the prize, which is making sure that we have a city that doesn't rely on shelter to allow human beings to live in dignity.
Right, I think we need to make those upfront investments. So Governor Hochul's made historic investments, $25 billion, 100,000 rehabbed or new units, both supportive and affordable housing, all across the state. In the last budget, more than $3 billion in childcare, which means folks can work, can get an education, can get ahead because they've got childcare. So more of that upfront investment also means that it's one thing to have a voucher, but if there's no place to go with that voucher, so we have to build that housing, we have to rehab that housing, and I think more of those investments, and to make them truly affordable, that means greater subsidy, so that you reach the 30% of AMI, the 50% of AMI, not the 80 and above. And so I think much more of that needs to be done, and I think this administration's committed to that.
And I think, ultimately our goal should be to have good places like Wynn for homeless people to be, but to put places like Wynn out of business, right? That's the ultimate, goal.
Well, that's what I said we will know that we have conquered the homelessness crisis when Wynn is no longer in business. I said that at the shelter, at the site. And just to say, I visited Wynn. It's great. Everything is great there. But then there was a person living there with her and her two daughters. I don't know if you remember this. Her and her two daughters. And she's a city worker.
Yeah.
Right?
Not the only one.
She was a city worker. And the sad part was, she worked in the office that administers those vouchers. She was in the shelter because she had gotten an increase in, whatever issues. But then the apartments that she was visiting, the owners were refusing to take the vouchers. And her day job, and she was dressing that morning, we were there talking with her and her daughter. She's taking her daughters to school, she's dressed, she's going into the office, she's coming to the city or agency. She has this voucher. She works day in and day out to place people in apartments with a voucher. She couldn't get into an apartment. She's holding a voucher. There's something wrong there.
Well, two things there. I mean, one thing we have to add to the list of things we need to do is to increase enforcement of income source discrimination, because that shouldn't happen. But then that story those are the stories that we need to tell more and more, because the story that you hear in the media about what it means to be homeless, there's no connection to the reality of the experience of just people who can't afford to live in the city. And the more we can tell those stories, I do think most people are actually good people and decent people. I think the more we can tell those stories, we can get to the heart of your first question, which is how do we reduce the friction and the opposition that comes from just common sense programs, whether it be affordable housing, supportive housing, or shelters, that we need to have a city that we can be proud of.
I'm going to move on to the.
Before you continue, Chris, I think the misconception communities have, and when I say we have to engage communities more, the misconception they have is that when you're putting a shelter up, it's people who are not working, people who are addicts, people who are everything that's bad with a person, but they're never told that, listen, this is your neighbor who had a fire at that house, and insurance wasn't covering everything, so now they need somewhere to go, and the only place that we can put them in temporarily is a shelter, and it's your neighbor. We have to place a human face on the people who are living in our shelter, and too often we don't do that. We see people who are sleeping on the streets, and we're like, oh, please, all he does is drink alcohol, that's why he's on the street. But that's not it. He probably used alcohol just to mask the problems that he was having. And so we're not seeing that.
I also think it's worth noting that plenty of shelters, I'm looking at Molly, plenty of shelters are sited in places where it was a blighted block. empty building, empty lot, poorly lit. There were problems with crime and what have you. And the siding of that program, so it could be shelter, could be supportive housing, what have you, actually improved the community. So what was once opposition, I can think of a couple places right off the top of my head. I can think of one in Kensington, I can think of another in Crown Heights, where the opposition was fierce and they sued us over it. And ultimately they embraced that shelter because it took a building that was a mess and made it into something quite beautiful. It lit the block in a way it wasn't before. Crime was down. The neighbors invited, all kinds of activities that they took up with the shelter residents. Like there's many examples of this across the city where these programs have actually improved their community and were ultimately welcomed. And I think bringing some of those folks who had that experience to the siding of a shelter in some other community where there's fear and misunderstanding is a big help.
All right, so the next question. You've got a room full of, people who are experts in different ways, government officials, law enforcement, people in philanthropy, advocacy, people with lived experience. Each of you, if you were to ask this room to do one thing that would help end poverty and end homelessness in New York City, what would that be? You can direct it at whoever you want or the whole room.
I'm looking at NYPD, and why I'm saying looking at NYPD because I visited this place yesterday, and they talked about the homeless population that they had in a park, and these outreach workers went and had a conversation with NYPD, and NYPD worked with them, and it changed the dynamic of everything that was happening there. We have to stop criminalizing homelessness. That's part of it. Yesterday when we were talking about the great work that NYPD was doing with this particular organization, I was in Harlem, this particular organization, and how the people who were in this encampment started to look at NYPD as their friend because they started to have conversations, right? They were no longer, because they were saying, they were just arresting people and saying, whatever, giving them tickets, whatever. And when they changed that, the interaction, it changed everything. And so we have to first start looking at homelessness as just as someone being down on their luck, and how do we lift them out of that? We cannot look, that saying, never look down on a man unless you're picking him up. We have to start, each of us in this room have to start doing that. It starts with us. And when we're saying we're having real talk, it starts with us. Well, let's look at when you see a homeless person, call an agency, call someone, and say, I've seen it. I've done that. Yes. We're not going to talk 311. But call someone and let them know there's someone in crisis living under the train tracks or wherever. Because somebody go out there and help them out. It's all of us. All of us, we tend to, in New York, we tend to wear blinders. We see people and we just like, oh, okay, and we keep going. Because we always have somewhere to go and something to do, so we never look at a person. So let's start by looking at the people on the streets and lifting them up. And it will change the dynamics of New York City's homelessness situation. That's just what I think. But thank you, NYPD, for that.
It's a wonderful question, but an impossible one.
Totally.
Because we are where we are because of hundreds of years of interlocking systems of oppression.
Come on.
There is no one thing, I appreciate you. There is no one thing that we can do to essentially to rewrite the history of our nation. But that being said, it starts with establishing a goal and moving forward. So just one thing, I gave you a shout out. I want to give you a shout out, Commissioner. The commission, the Child Poverty Commission that you mentioned. State commission with the charge to reduce child poverty in New York by half. I think one thing we can do is we can set ambitious, clear, measurable goals for ourselves and rigorously commit to holding ourselves accountable for achieving those goals. So whatever the work is, it can't just be about speaking in generalities about we got to do better by this, we got to do better by that. We're going to decrease child poverty. We're going to make sure that every third grader in New York can read. I mean, pick your thing. But we as a society have to have a system of accountability that we can actually hold ourselves accountable for. That's the one thing I would say as a general approach. Second, we have to, and I'm looking at you, Jennifer, of course, co-chaired the commission that led to 3 successful initiatives, looking at the way, the central role that race plays in our city. How would you say being explicit and intentional about centering the role of racial oppression, all things that we do? Again, not a particular policy, but the more that we do that and make it a normal part of how we talk. The question isn't, what is the education? I work mostly in education. It's not, what is the graduation rate? What is the graduation rate for Black people? What is the graduation rate for Asians, for whites, for Latinos? Centering that conversation, everything we do, hold us accountable to having a better set of outcomes. And then, the last thing I would say, again, it's an impossible list. I just sort of come back to work. Work has to work for people. And a lot of what we talked about here is that just because you can do everything you're supposed to do in this world, go to school, graduate, get a job, work for your city, and you are still not able to provide for your family, still not able to guarantee that your child will have a better life than you will, which is a whole part of this national experiment of ours. So again, we have to make sure that work works. Living wage, real minimum wage, jobs with benefits, paid family leave, these things can't be exceptions. They have to be the normal expectation. And it's just everywhere but here. My best friend lives in Prague. Him and his wife is Czech. And when I hear him and his wife talk about the child care, they just had their first baby. It makes me so, I cannot even listen to the it's insane. It's insane. And that's the way that normal people behave. That's the way that civilized countries behave. So, to make what'd you say? Am I calling this uncivilized? Well,
Dan?
Yeah,
point out the facts.
Yeah, I completely agree with both Rich and Roxanne. I think for sure this is centering who's most affected and why, and doing something about the systems that have grown up over 400 years. We've only had less than 60 years of the Civil Rights Acts, and everyone behaves. Lots of people behave as though we're done here. But we can see right now, so source of income discrimination. We can see racial discrimination play out right now. Redlining and housing. We have Black and brown families have a fraction of the wealth of white families, if only because of housing discrimination across centuries. And it's a problem right here, right now. It's not a problem of yesterday. It's a problem of right here, right now that still needs to be solved. We need to push back on every day. We have a Supreme Court that, frankly, speaking of education, is pretty even chance, it seems to me, is going to get rid of affirmative action in higher ed. And we have, I think, increasing limits, therefore, on doing racially targeted things that actually need to be done. But that just means, I think, for the rest of us then to be inventive about the way in which we go about solving these problems. We may not be able to use the most direct path, the path we would have used in the past or would like to use now. But I think it really requires each and every one of us to prioritize speaking loudly and forcefully to our elected officials, voting, going to an election and voting for the people who are actually going to make a difference in the way in which you want to see a difference made. And then never leaving people like Roxanne and me alone. You should press on us all the time about doing the right thing. You should never shut up about it. Because it's making it a priority. Because if it's not a priority for folks like us, then other things will be. So again, I think it's solvable, but it's each and every one of us using our voice to press on the thing we know needs to be done and can be done.
And I would just add in the annoying Dan and the senator, one thing at people in the room who are shelter providers or any kind of service providers, register your clients or tenants to vote. You're allowed to do that. It's a nonpartisan action. The Board of Elections will help you do that. And it was pretty, when in much as we're a family shelter, we had some folks who were registering to vote for the first time. And that is always really thrilling when you get to see somebody do that. So that's another thing we can do. Last question. to make it even more complicated, we know that poverty and homelessness is often and frequently an intergenerational issue. And that has, I believe, that needs some of the responses we've talked about, all of the responses we've talked about, but some additional specific ones to really break that cycle of both poverty and homelessness. And what would be your kind of closing thoughts on that? And what's the additional piece for that?
Well, maybe the one thing I will add that we didn't talk much about is the importance of effective, quality, affordable, accessible early childhood experiences, including childcare. I feel like childcare, early childhood, one of the most powerful interventions we can have, in part precisely because of the multi-generational effects. On the one hand, for the children who are receiving quality, rich early childhood experiences, the benefits are overwhelming, demonstrated. Lifelong earnings, health, with every outcome, students do better. And even recent research showing that for extremely high quality programs, those effects themselves are multi-generational, so that the children of those children who themselves participate in early childhood program when they're young, that their children continue to have better outcomes, which is not surprising because now those children become stronger parents. But of course, child care is also an incredible boon for the parents. It means that you can work. It means that you can work and feel relieve the stress of not being able to provide for your child and your family. So just of all the things that we said, everything that we said ultimately contributes to having a city and a society where social mobility is expected and the norm and it's a possibility. I think that childcare is one of the most important investments we can make. One where I think the state and the city in recent years have made tremendous strides. But continuing to focus, children will do better, parents will do better, the family will do better, and it's an amazing generational.
I remember when I first got elected speaker, and I said I wanted to work on middle schools, and I said to Randy Weingartner, "What do we need to do to improve middle schools?" And she said, "Improve pre-kindergarten and kindergarten." So you're absolutely right about that, Senator.
He's correct. We also have, when we spoke about, education will lift people out of that cycle of poverty, to generational poverty. We also have to look at the job trainings that we're bringing into communities. We know in what communities are in need, right? We have the data. We don't have to go out and study it. We already have the information as to what is needed in the community. For example, we've put up so many new units of housing in Brownsville and East New York, but have we put in the other services that are needed? People are moving into housing, their children are moving in with them, but there are no libraries close by there where you can go if a parent needs to go and do some after school work with their child while their child is doing their schoolwork. They're doing GED program or something like that. We're not doing all of that in communities, and we have to do more of that. We have to bring the child care centers, we have to offer the child care centers more through collaboration with others, with schools and child care centers. But those are some of the things that will lift people out of that cycle of poverty. And then we have to look at the businesses that are coming into the areas. As we're building housing in communities, new businesses are coming in. But the businesses are coming in just to take out the communities. Mm-hmm. They're not giving back. And so what are you doing? We should make mandated. We tend not to like to use the words mandate. But businesses that are coming into communities, they're coming in because they see that everybody knows people who are poor spend more money than people who are rich, right? That's the bottom line. And so these businesses that are coming into these communities, they know they're coming in, they're going to get money, but they're not investing in the people who are in that community. And that's what we need them to do. When they start investing in the people in the community, it will lift that community out of the cycle of poverty. That's what we need to do. It's education of the young children, helping the parents in whatever, to elevate themselves in the job training, whatever, and the businesses giving back when they give back, communities will understand, well, wait a minute. They're investing in us, we have to elevate ourselves.
Thank you very much, Dan.
We mentioned earlier the Child Poverty Reduction Advisory Council. So the governor signed into law almost a year ago now the act that created the council that aims to reduce child poverty by 50% in the next 10 years. And created a expert panel. Rich sits on that, and we're just getting rolling. Our second meeting is coming up in the next few weeks, and it includes coming with recommendations to the governor and the legislature on things that need to change. Funding we need to do and where we need to do it. I don't want to necessarily prejudge that, but I'll note that again that the child care, we completely agree. Last year's budget with more than $3 billion for that very purpose. We know that spending on poverty programs is not money down a rat hole, although many would have you believe that it is. But SNAP dollars, we continue to have increased SNAP dollars from the overhang of COVID and all the challenges the households have. We know that every dollar in SNAP is equal to about $1.70 in terms of economic activity. We know that other like cash assistance, every dollar in cash assistance is equal to at least $1.25 in economic activity. So this and households that are poor, as the senator just noted, are going to spend every nickel we give them because they have to. They need it to live. They're going to spend it at the grocery store, at the laundromat, at the hardware store, what have you. And that is economic development money in their community. That does something to sustain their community. Not dissimilarly, and I want this to be heard in its right context, spending on poverty elimination programs is also a way to reduce crime. Now that I'm not suggesting that poor people are the only ones who commit crime. There are lots of rich people who commit crimes. I think some are being
Big crimes, big money crimes.
But it's also true that many people commit low-level crimes to survive. And if we just did something about helping them to survive, they wouldn't be committing those crimes. And so this helps individuals and the families and those children in those families, but it also helps their communities in terms of economic development and in terms of crime reduction. And I think it's just worth noting that a child that ends up in shelter is vastly more likely to be in shelter as an adult. We have to start with the youngest, and that's some of where we're headed in terms of tax credits. I think I don't want to prejudge what the council does necessarily, but is to aim it at the poorest households and the youngest children. Big important development things happen for children in their first 5 years. And so that's why that child care was so terribly important. That's why we're looking at tax credits for those households, the poorest households and the youngest children, because if we give people the right start in life, the likelihood that this turns out better for them in terms of education, health outcomes, housing, job opportunities, all improves vastly.
Thank you, and I'll just add one other additional thing, college prep and college tours, because if it's often said, if you haven't seen it, you don't know you can be it.
Yeah.
And we take kids to colleges, close by ones, but it makes a big difference. So with that said, can I get a big round of applause for our panel? And, I think we should do everything the senator said, and the state will be a better place, but thank you all.
So we're going to start with the second part of the program with the keynote speaker. Just a little fun fact. I was sitting over here and I'm looking at the keynote speaker and she caught my eye and she's like, oh, hey, and I said, I bet she doesn't even recognize me because we have this black girl magic and our hair changes and different colors. So she's like, I don't know that lady. But she waved. She was very kind. But I am so honored to introduce this woman. I've had the opportunity to share some space with her at WBLS while she works on the Public Affairs show, and just to sit around her wisdom and her knowledge was just and continues to be an amazing opportunity. So Jennifer Jones Austin Esquire, a fourth generation leader of faith and social justice. Jennifer Justin fights for equity. as CEO of the Federation of the Protestant Welfare Agencies, an anti-poverty policy and advocacy organization with 170 member agencies and faith partners. She has led and secured monumental changes in social policy to strengthen and empower the disenfranchised and marginalized. Ms. Jones-Austin brings her work to a profound understanding of the link between race, poverty, law, and social policy in America, and the role religion plays. Please welcome Jennifer Jones-Austin.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be with all of you. And I've never worked for HRA, but in some ways I feel like I've come home. Well, actually, I worked for CWA when it was part of HRA, so maybe I have come home. Is that right? Okay, so then, hey brothers, hey sisters, good to see you all. And I saw Pat, and I saw this beautiful face, and I was like, I don't know. And then we connected, and some other friends are here in the room, like Skip and others from BLS. So it's good to be with all of you. And I want you to know that the team here at DSS, in planning for this afternoon, has taken great care of me, so much that I want to share with you all a little secret. So when Commissioner Jenkins reached out and invited me to speak, I instantly looked at my calendar and said, okay, we're going to clear this up and see how I can be here. And so I said yes, right away. And then it took me a while to appreciate, but I didn't really know what I was saying yes to. But that's what happens, right? When the commissioner is your friend, that's what happens when you know that the commissioner is doing the work, not just trying, but doing the work. And so when Commissioner Jenkins asks, it's yes, and then it's okay, now what does yes mean? And so, I'm going to tell you that I was a little humbled when I learned that yes meant speaking about poverty and homelessness to an audience that is far more expert than I am on matters of the challenges of everyday homelessness. It was very humbling. And I guess that's what I get, right? That's what I get when I just follow, because I admire, I adore, I respect, I revere the commissioner, that I then have to figure it out on the back end what I'm here to do. And so, being very sincere, what I'm appreciating is that while I'm not an expert in the management of everyday homelessness, I think I'm here because the moment calls for something different. All right? In a city where people, like the nation over, people are grappling with ever-increasing inflation, a city where long before inflation, political activists, perennial public elected official candidate, James McMillan, y'all know him, y'all know what he said, city where the rent is too damn high, a city where government officials and public servants have labored tirelessly, year after year, administration after administration, to solve homelessness, and where people who've experienced homelessness for a variety of reasons have found themselves gripped in its claws and grappling with the countless other challenges that often go hand in hand. This moment calls for something different. It calls for someone different. So here I am, I'm standing before you, and I'm showing up differently. And my friend, Commissioner Jenkins, Gary, as I know him, Karen, they know I show up differently. I kind of bring my whole self to the work, whole self to the world. But today I'm going to show up in the spirit of the biblical, hey, Commissioner Dan Hauser, he knows me too. And Cecile, and now I got to behave. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to show up in the spirit of the biblical prophet, Amos. Some of you may know of Amos. Amos spoke out against the increasing disparities between the very wealthy and the very poor, and the responsibility of the people to do something about it. So like Amos, I'm not here to talk about charity. I'm not here to talk about poverty relief. I'm here to talk about justice. I'm here to talk about poverty liberation. Justice in the fight against poverty, structural poverty, and homelessness. I've not come peddling a magic pill. I haven't come with a proof positive, evidence-based solution to ending New York City homelessness, but I have come with what may seem a revolutionary idea. Are you ready for it? It's not necessarily a new one, but still, it's revolutionary. It's an idea that has every possibility of seeding a proof-positive, evidence-based solution. Here it is. What if the answer to the seemingly intractable problem of homelessness in New York City is to earnestly center on its roots? What if we as policymakers, policy influencers, practitioners, and perhaps most meaningfully, as everyday New Yorkers, some of us with lived experience, dare to dream, dare to believe that the solution to homelessness is not only to treat it, but to also prevent and cure it. And by prevention, I mean to kill the seeds and the roots that give rise to homelessness in the first place. Back in 2017, when homelessness was then surging in New York City, I received a phone call from then Commissioner Banks. He and his team had developed a new plan focusing on permanent housing, prevention, and decent shelter, and he'd called to share it with me. Shortly after he began laying out the plan, which sounded very much like a good plan, a solid plan for dealing with people at imminent risk of losing their homes, and people who already had, I was struck by what seemed to be missing from the plan, and the many other plans that I've been a part of, and others have been a part of. So I politely interrupted Commissioner Banks, and I asked him a basic question, something like this. Before you go on, Commissioner Banks, help me to understand. Is the plan to treat and reduce homelessness? Or are you also centering on how to cure and end it? As you reform the system to treat and manage homelessness more effectively, are you also focusing on how we can actually end it? Now, being a New York City former public servant with enough years of service in a crisis-driven agency and in City Hall, I've come to understand firsthand the reactive tendencies of government. And as an advocate who has studied the teachings of Grassi, German philosopher, concerning the strategies of war of position and war of maneuver when pressing for government change, in that moment when I was talking to Commissioner Banks, I was centering on the question, the pressing of the point. What is the fundamental role of government in dealing with homelessness? To be reactive or proactive, or both? Is government interested, willing to be both a reactive body and a proactive agent for change? We live in a city, here in New York City, where the chief reason for people being homeless, as the panel just talked about, is the lack of affordable housing. Indeed, there are many persons living in New York City and on the streets who are homeless due to mental health challenges and challenges with substance use. And there are people escaping violence and other at-home crises who end up unhoused. But unaffordable housing is the main driver of homelessness. So logically, we turn to increased prevention, more affordable permanent housing, and decent shelter as the solution. And to varying degrees, it works. The more we can provide right to counsel, the longer people who benefit are able to stay in their homes. The more affordable permanent housing options there are for people struggling to make ends meet, the lesser the need will be for shelter. And the more support we have for decent and safe shelter, the more inclined people who are living on the streets may be to go inside. But is that enough? Is centering on solutions that reduce homelessness enough? What if we, as a city and as a society, what if we were to strive to both reduce and end homelessness? To not only treat homelessness, but to cure it. Now, some people would argue that treatment is the cure. Keeping people at risk of being unhoused from being unhoused is the cure. Creating more affordable housing is the cure. Strengthening our shelter system is the cure. But I contend that they're not. They can't be the cure because they don't begin to tackle the reason that many people are unhoused in the first place. They don't begin to touch one of the primary underlying roots, the root causes of homelessness. They don't begin to meaningfully tackle poverty, systemic and structural poverty. The great majority of people in this nation who are homeless are poor. By definition, they do not have enough money to meet their basic needs, including food, shelter, and clothing. And why do they not have enough money? High housing costs and high healthcare costs are real and legitimate factors, but so are stagnant wages, unemployment, and underemployment, and I'll add to that wage and occupation segregation, especially for people of color who, even while working full-time jobs, as was talked about in the panel just a few minutes ago, even while working full-time jobs, they struggle disproportionately because on average, people, and I'm talking mainly about people of color, are paid less than their white counterparts. In 2014, the organization that I lead, FPWA, and the Fiscal Policy Institute uncovered data evidencing that here in New York City, just as Senator Persaud highlighted, 40% of the contracted full-time human services workforce was making less than $15 an hour. 25% making less than $9 an hour. And surprise, surprise, the great majority of those persons, women of color, many with bachelor's degrees and master's degrees. These people were seeking, just as Senator Persaud spoke to, the same income supports as the clients that they were working with to help make ends meet. Educated and working full-time, still in need of income supports. Some of them, just as she said, eligible for and receiving the same benefits. Faced with an extraordinarily high cost of living and a shortage of living wage jobs, nearly 1 in 5 New Yorkers lives below the federal poverty line, which is those of us who are familiar with the federal poverty line, the level, we know that it lowballs the true cost of living all across America, thereby significantly discounting the actual number of people who by definition are living in poverty. Yet when we strive to reduce and end homelessness, tackling and reducing structural poverty isn't really a robust component of the solution. We actually talk about ending poverty and we talk about policies and programs. Well, I'm just going to tell you in a few minutes, that really doesn't get at it. Come on. I love you, I respect you. I've been doing policy work for nearly 30 years. And when you are building policies and programs on structurally flawed laws, you get but so far. I'm on board. I want you to know that I'm on board with growing affordable housing here in New York City. I'm not saying we shouldn't, we have to do that. But if poverty, income insufficient to meet your basic living expenses, is the crux of the problem, shouldn't we be thinking and working collaboratively to address economic deprivation? Structural economic deprivation as an integral part of the solution. Now, some of you may be thinking, that's beyond the scope of the Department of Social Services. That's beyond the scope of practitioners. But is it? Dare we dream? Dare we believe? Is it? We can actually prevent and cure homelessness. But we have to dream and believe and then act on that. 13 years ago, as Commissioner Dan Hauser knows very well, I had a near-death experience. I fell suddenly and unexpectedly ill on a Friday. Woke up with a flu-like fever, high temperature, and I thought that's what it was, so I just pressed through the day, going through meetings and what have you. Came home, got in bed, kept waking up during the middle of the night, drenched in my own sweat. Saturday, I woke up, my husband said, you've got to go to the doctor, you've got to go to the ER. I go to the ER, I spend hours in the ER. Y'all never had that experience, right? Not in New York City, just me. Go to the ER. I'm there for about 6-7 hours. Finally, they triage me. They tell me that I have a run-of-the-mill virus. Just tell me to take some Advil and sleep it off. So that's what I do. I go home and I start popping Advil, trying to sleep it off. Sunday comes, there's no change. Monday comes, no change other than the fact that I wake up in the afternoon and I'm blind. I can't see. That's when we knew it was not your run-of-the-mill virus. Call up my doctor. She tells me to come on in. We go in. She looks at me. She says, I can't do anything for you. We've got to take you to the hospital right away. They take me to the hospital, and over the course of the next 48 hours or so, they begin to run, no, actually 24 hours, a series of tests. And by Wednesday afternoon, the doctors have determined that I have leukemia. I have acute myeloid leukemia. Now here's what happened. They told me that if I received chemotherapy, that the cancer would likely be killed and I'd go into remission. But within 2 days of being diagnosed, the cancer, a leukemia blood cancer, began moving through my body, began shutting down my lungs. I was intubated because I could no longer breathe on my own. They put me in a coma, and they told my husband that I was going to die. So Friday afternoon, 1 week from the time that I first fell ill, they tell my husband I'm going to die. And they say I'm going to die within 48 hours. Now, fortunately, even though the doctors believed that I was going to die, that I had a 1% chance of living, they decided to administer a chemotherapy cocktail. And I don't have to tell you how that worked out, right? It worked out well. I came on through. I survived the cancer. I should say I survived that battle with cancer. But the doctors told my family that while I'd won the battle, there was a war that was raging within. I had an environmentally caused leukemia. I was at 9/11. There's a greater incidence of people who suffered with blood disorders and blood cancers after walking through and being a part of 9/11. The cancer was an environmentally caused cancer that had rendered my blood and bone marrow system defunct, broken chromosome. I no longer had a functional blood and bone marrow system. They told me that I needed a bone marrow transplant if I was to survive the disease long term. Now here's what happened. After about 3-4 months of my husband, Jess, and some friends and family moving heaven and earth, Deputy Mayor Williams Isom right at the helm with my husband, moving heaven and earth to try to find me a donor, I got a transplant. Why am I telling you this story? How is it even relevant to the issues of homelessness and poverty? Here's how it's relevant. Because it illustrates a point. The chemo that I received treated the cancer, but it wasn't the cure for what caused the cancer. Eviction prevention, affordable housing, and more shelters to treat homelessness, they're good. They treat it, but they don't cure what causes homelessness in the first place. When I had cancer, my greatest chance for survival required that the root cause of my cancer be addressed. Chemotherapy kept the cancer at bay, but it wasn't the cure. The cure was to kill the root of my cancer, to get rid of my damaged blood and bone marrow system. If as a city and society we are sincere about ending homelessness, we have to kill it at its root. We have to address and dismantle structural economic deprivation. We know that here in New York City, Black and brown children and families are disproportionately represented in our homeless shelters. And we know that it is Black and brown women who are most subjected to occupation and wage segregation, and who earn approximately 63 cents and 56 cents respectively for what white men earn on average. It's no mystery why so many can't make ends meet. No mystery why so many struggle to pay their rent and stay housed. Why 1 in 4 Black children and 1 in 5 Hispanic children are poor. Why it's so hard to break the cycle of poverty, especially for those who've experienced intergenerational poverty. Why we are continually looking to some, programs to say we've reduced poverty. We haven't really.
Not at all.
We really haven't, because we haven't gotten to the root. When the federal poverty level says that a family of 4, 2 adults and 2 children, with a gross income of $27,751, no matter where they're living, New York City or Decatur, Georgia, isn't technically poor? A family of 3, 1 adult and 2 children, with a gross income of $22,001 or more, living in Los Angeles, Omaha, Nebraska, is above the poverty line? That is structural economic deprivation. When these federal poverty levels enable wage stagnation and limit eligibility for critical income supports, including child care, food supports, housing for people making more than the threshold level but less than the actual cost of living, we have to change those structures because they are what perpetuate poverty and the problem of homelessness. When these federal poverty levels intentionally undercount who's poor and who's in need, we have to change them. We have to change the federal poverty level. We have to not only treat the problem, but change the structures that enable it from the very beginning. We have to center on the laws that enable economic deprivation. Economic deprivation is structural, my friends. It's what upholds an unjust capitalist system. It's what allows for us to perpetuate the narratives about black and brown people not really carrying their weight when they are working full-time jobs, earning college and master's degrees, and they still can't make ends meet. That is economic deprivation, and it's structural. We've got to dismantle that. Now, isn't that a revolutionary idea? But it's doable. And you know how I know it's doable? Because we started here in New York City. Just last week, New Yorkers voted to advance racial justice and equity in core government functioning, beginning with writing people of color into the New York City Constitution, saying that we are a multiracial democracy, right? And then there was a proposal centered on the Office of Racial Equity to make sure that government is accountable for driving and advancing equity and justice. But here, this is how I know it's possible. Because we voted to calculate the true cost of living here in New York City. And what will that do? That will allow us to begin to look at policies, structures that allow for wage deprivation, that allow for us to not really provide the supports that are needed to help people not just get by, but actually get ahead. So I want to ask you, should we, dare we dream, dare we believe that we can truly prevent and cure homelessness? Can we reduce poverty by addressing willful and economic deprivation, structural economic deprivation, and in turn move closer to the cure for homelessness? I'm going to tell you that years ago, I served as the Deputy Commissioner for the Administration of Children's Services. And we used to have symposiums as well. One of the most impactful symposiums that I ever participated in was a symposium where the presenter, the opening presenter, asked us at the very beginning to close our eyes and think about how we got to the symposium. And he talked about, like, what happened when you first woke up. He said you started thinking about your day and how you had to get through your day. He said you were imagining yourself in those spaces. You imagined what you'd be wearing. You imagined, like, how you would get from place A to place B. And then you moved into that. All we have to do, and I say this as the chair of the Racial Justice Commission, I say this as the person who chaired the Board of Correction and said, we're going to end solitary confinement. All you have to do is imagine something greater than what is, and then be willing to step into it. So what I'm here to do today is to challenge all of us. Yes, we need more affordable housing. Yes, we need to do more by way of prevention, and we need to strengthen our shelter system. But if we're truly, sincerely committed to undoing the need for shelter in the first place, we have to center on all of these systems that have been designed to uphold the system. My favorite line of lately, when people say the system ain't working, the system's working exactly how it was designed to work. Right? So we've got to change the system. So what I want you all to do with me, and what I know your commissioner is committed to, our commission is committed to, is imagining something more than what is. believing that not only can we engage in poverty relief work, but we can do poverty liberation work. Not only do we have to center on the charitable work, and I'm calling programs charity, because whenever we believe that there are people in this world that have to forever be reliant upon income supports to make ends meet, we have said, we have agreed that they should live in a status and a place that we don't. That's not right. So I am encouraging you to be an imaginative person, to bring your whole self to the work, and start thinking about what is more. Be the change that we all wish to see. Thank you so much.
We thank God for that cocktail. We thank God for that trend. If you are not encouraged, be encouraged for her leadership. Let her leadership go forth and magnify across the world. Okay, so we are going to move on to our next panel, Real Talk with people with lived experience. We actually must talk to the people who have the lived experience, who are on the ground doing the work. I would like to welcome to the stage Shams DeBaron, Khadijah Davis, Jahid tomorrow.
Good afternoon. I don't know about y'all, but I feel inspired, right? All right, so real briefly, I'm going to introduce myself, and then I will allow my panel to introduce themselves. I am Sean Ebony Coleman. I am the founder and executive director at Destination Tomorrow, the Bronx LGBTQ Center. We provide direct services for those who identify within the LGBTQ community. It's always, for me, it's always a challenge, right? Because I'm a community member as well. I started Destination Tomorrow in 2009 because I didn't see myself represented in those spaces, right? We're in the South Bronx, and we didn't have anyone of color that was running an agency that represented LGBTQ folks. So as an open transgender man, I decided that who better than me, right? So when I'm sitting in these spaces, I often, one, want to identify that, but two, I share space with community. So I switch hats every now and then. You know, in my neighborhood, we call it code switching. So I may code switch just a little bit because I may have to take the executive director hat off so that I can give you a community response. Because the one thing that I have not heard, and we speak about diversity, but I haven't heard much about the LGBTQ community and how homelessness and poverty impact them. So I'm gonna try to introduce that as we move forward. But first, I am going to ask my panelists. So the first question is, no one is more suited or better suited to weigh in on topics of poverty and homelessness than those with those lived experiences. With that said, can each of you introduce yourself and share your experiences? We'll start, ladies first. We're gonna do this. And we're gonna bring it this way.
Thank you. This works? Y'all can hear me? Yeah. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for this. My name is Sarah Wilson. For identification purposes, I am disabled, dual diagnosed, mental health and substance use. On Social Security disability, fixed income, needed of a fixed rent, which is how I wound up in need of housing help. Anyway, that's where I started doing my advocacy work. I spent 2 years in 5 different shelters trying to get somebody to do my housing packet, which I came in with all my paperwork in hand. And yeah, there's a lot more I can say, but I think that gives you just a little bit of who I am, and I'll let someone else talk.
We're gonna tap in with you again. London.
My name is Lyndon. Good morning, afternoon, everyone. I'm out of it. I have not slept all night, but I'm here representing the youth. I am the New York City Youth Action Board Co-Chair Coordinator. I'm also a former youth peer advocate in RHY services. I'm a former advocate in mental health services. And I'm just a certified peer advocate in intersectional systems. Because when we look at advocacy and homelessness, it's an intersectional process. And I've been homeless since the age of 18. I have my own apartment now, but the reason why I got into advocacy was because our system has failed our youth. Our system has looked at youth as the invisible population. And this is something that I have been passionate about since I've gotten into advocacy, and I want to elevate that work that we are doing. And because of the advocacy that the Youth Action Board has done this year, we have now developed our own youth-led plan, Opportunity Start with a Home, which was granted $15 million in funding to help with the interventions of ending youth homelessness in our city.
Thank you so much for sharing. Ahira? Yeah, a little closer.
Thank you. So I'm a little nervous because it's a crowd, so bear with me, please. But my name is Jahaira Gonzalez. I am the Director of Outreach and Prevention Service at Destination Tomorrow, the Bronx LGBTQ Center in the South Bronx. I experienced homelessness at the age of 16 years old. When I left home, it was because I didn't get along with my stepfather. My stepfather didn't understand why his stepson wanted to be a woman. So I left home. I wanted to prove to my family that I could become the woman that I am today. And, you know, of course, there was a lot of obstacles and challenges for me, you know, because here I am at 16 years old living in the streets. I'm trans, you know, nobody understands my lifestyle. So it was very difficult, but I made it and I'm here and I'm surviving.
Hi, I'm Khadijah. I think I'm loud enough, right? Y'all can hear me. Got that theater voice working for me there. I'm happy to be here today. I'm actually representing the families of New York. When you think about homelessness, I think most times people don't think about families because most times they're hidden in shelters. Cute, they're not the best shelters either, but you know, we're hidden in shelters and people don't see us on the street as much, so they're kind of like, there's no families that's, you know, homeless. But the truth is a lot of people in New York are families. I used to work out of college at the time when I was actually in shelter. I was working part-time and we don't make enough money to actually survive in New York City. I want to say I finished high school, I went to college, I have a bachelor's degree, and I had a child, and I still couldn't make enough money to survive in New York City by myself without going into a shelter. I went to try to go to shelter several times, but I'm going to talk about the last one. The reason why I ended up there is because me and the person didn't get along. I was renting a room, but when you have a child, it's kind of hard to live with people sometimes who's not actually related to you. And I had to fight my way to even get into shelter, and I had to fight my way to get out of shelter. People think that, oh, when you get into shelter, oh, how's it going to be an easy thing? You're going to get a house, apartment, this, no. Most times people are in there with full-time jobs and they just cannot get out of shelter because either they can't get a voucher, or if they do get a voucher, people are not taking it. So I do a lot of advocacy because I believe in the work that I do. It actually kind of fell in my lap by accident, but I've always worked with like the homeless population when I was younger anyway, so probably I was always meant to do it. I just had to experience it to really understand how it is to be a homeless person out there. It can be hard, it can be depressing, but you can make it out. And I want to make sure any families who are out there in New York City who are even watching this knowing that I made it, you can make it. And not because you are somebody. Don't make anybody make you feel that like you're nothing. You are somebody and you're going to be the future of tomorrow. And that's all matters. So that's what I represent in this panel.
Thank you so much for sharing.
That's not loud. I'm about to spit some bars. I'm Shams, the Baron, also known as the Homeless Hero. I'm extremely humble. I've been all over the place. I've told my story over and over, so I'm not gonna get into that. But I'm appreciate being here, and let's go.
Hi.
Perfect. We're gonna spit bars later, Shamus, okay? I promise you. We're gonna kill them later. As an advocate myself, I have a question for you, right? Because I know how draining it can be on you as a person, right? And then when you're experiencing other challenges, such as homelessness and poverty, how do you maintain, what keeps you doing the work, right? Some of you have already mentioned why you got into the work, but what keeps you here?
For me, I would say my community. My community helps me keep going.
And I just want you to touch on, like, what is it about the community that, right? Is it the fact that you don't feel like the community has been represented? Like, share some of the reasons. Like, what is it about community that keeps you here?
I would say the lack of adequate housing. There is no specific housing for TGNC folks, right? We have for the youth, but what happens to the folks that are 30 and up? You know, and I'm 43 years old, so it's like, you know, if and I hate to say this, but if you're not HIV positive, especially in the LGBTQ community, there's no housing.
Sorry. Okay, so for myself, it's the trauma. I only spent 2 years in shelter, and I came in old. I came in at 35, having never seen or heard from anything. And when I say it was a culture shock, being in a room with 25 other women in the end of August with no air conditioning, things of that nature. But I've been out now for 5 years, and I'm still going to therapy to undo the institutionalization, to undo the trauma, and I was the expedited version. So I came in whole, so to speak, and I left a lot of people behind. Because of their policy, it wakes me up at night. So for my own personal selfish reasons of wanting to heal my own trauma, is why I do this, in addition to the people. But what I'm saying is I'll sleep better at night knowing that these bad policies are out of practice for the others. Thank you.
Would you like to be here?
One of the reasons why I personally do it is because, if you don't know, I have a YouTube channel, and I know I say it everywhere I go, honestly, but people come on there and they talk to me on Instagram because they don't want to put their whole business on YouTube, because, you know, on the comments anybody could read that. But when I talk to moms, or even men, young people, about what's happening to them and how they are affected and what to go, mind you, I know the system best for families, but if I can help a young person or a man or a single woman, because you know the systems, if you don't know, is different. It shouldn't be that different, but it is that different. And I try my best to help each individual person when they come back to me a year later saying, thank you for your help, your videos helped me, knowing that you're not alone. Even though you know you're not alone because people in the shelter are with you, but knowing that I came out of it and I'm at where I'm at, I still live in Nitrous, so I'm not like in a White House and nothing living, you know, but you know that person got out of it and they made something themselves, and it's like, that's what they are. I think that's what helps me keep on going on, because when moms come to me saying, thank you for helping me get out of this DV situations, thank you for this and thank you for that, I'm like, dang, people are really listening. I'm not like, you know, a big YouTuber or nothing, but it's like, people are really listening, people are really getting something out of it, and I try my best to give them resources what can help them and their families, or individuals in general.
If you only reach one person, that's who you were supposed to reach. Would anyone else likes to share?
I could share.
Please.
For me, it's my journey. I went through being in the system as a single adult, to then being in the system as a couple, to then being in the system with a child, to then finding housing. Then 3 months later, my house catching on fire and having to retransition into that system. Luckily, I had resources that I could utilize, that I was able to not have to go back into shelter to get an apartment. But, you know, now it's the journey. I don't want a young person to ever have to experience going through the system, facing denial after denial after denial, just to get a voucher. You know, 3 months, if you don't know where you were in the past 3 months in the DHS system in PAP, they deny you, you have to do the whole intake process. So it's our administrative burdens in our system. And the reason why I continue to advocate for our youth is because our system has oftentimes failed our youth. And that's why I'm here, to try and make that right.
Thank you for sharing.
I keep going because they didn't stop my EBT payments. Nah, I mean, you know, from me, I grew up in foster care since the age of 2. I was started experiencing homelessness at the age of 10. permanently discharged into the street without any type of safety net at the age of 12. My story will make a brass monkey cry. It's the subject, to be honest with you, people are trying to tell that story and all that comes with it from Hollywood before the homeless hero. That's how crazy it was. But I think what keeps me going, what puts me on this path, is the realization that a lot of what I go through is the result of America's treatment of black and brown people since the days of slavery. And I clearly know, based on my own life experience, how deeply rooted the systemic, structural, and institutional racism that permeates our city, state, and federal government negatively impacts my life and the lives of most of the people that are going through the same type of situations that I go through. So I stay in the game, especially after surviving COVID and almost dying. I stay in the game because it's like, you know, until we start to really just tear away at the white supremacy that exists in our country, you know, we're really not doing nothing. And so if you know, if this is my last day on earth, let it be me trying to tear that thing down. You know, if it's my last day on earth, I am going to destroy systemic, structural, and institutional racism. I'm not going to allow you to create a homeless shelter industrial complex and put 90% of black and brown people in it while you come into the communities that we lived in and you build these developments that are only being able to support those who benefited from slavery or the children of those, then I'm not with that. You know, so that's why I'm here.
Thank you. I'm tearing it down with you. I feel you. We're gonna tear it down together. And I just want to share why I stay, right? Because Destination Tomorrow was probably the hardest job I've ever had in my life. We're the only black and brown LGBT center that organized and being run and funded in New York State. I was gonna say city, but it's wider than that because it's New York State. The only one. So as a 54-year-old man who is formerly homeless and formerly incarcerated, it is my duty to be here to make sure that the next generation of TG&C folks get an opportunity to see what success looks like so that they understand that there's a possibility. So if I have to be here to be a possibility model, then that's why I'm here. And then the other reason I'm here is to hold everybody accountable, because I hear you saying that you want to tear down this and restructure that, but I don't hear much conversation about how the LGBTQ community fits into that, right? So I'm black and queer, right. Trans, so where do I fit in this whole structure? And are you rebuilding it and not including my voice? Because if you rebuild it and not include my voice, you've just oppressed me as well.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we are doing for the youth and our work is that we're creating an initiative for the host home and ballroom program for youth, which will support our LGBT community, because that is something that we look at. And we're also looking at policies to support our immigration youth, because with the asylum seekers that are coming into our system, we have youth that are being referred to ACS and DYCD, but because our shelters are so overcrowded, we need to do a better job in terms of our systematic approach.
And connections, and it also needs to be about connections. So the initiative you're going to start with ballroom, if you can reach out to me, we'd appreciate it, because we have a full initiative uptown that just involves ballroom youth. Deja, y'all gave me all the entertainers. I got the entertainers on this end.
I'll give you my card.
Please, I appreciate it. Khadijah, now you spoke about your YouTube channel, and I understand you also have a podcast.
I do.
What led you to that?
Well, actually, it's not personally my podcast.
Okay.
I work with the Family Homeless Coalition, and the podcast actually went through them. They found me initially on YouTube for my YouTube channel, telling people about my homeless experience and how it was. So I make different kind of videos, how to get food stamps, different things like that on my YouTube channel. Also, I vlog. My daughter, she's over there if you haven't seen it, the only kid in here. But so the podcast actually came out. I was like, I always want to do a podcast, and I gave them an idea. They said, sure, we can do it. And the podcast consists of people telling their stories. Shams was on there, basically telling people's stories who are families in New York City, so people can hear their voices. It's literally called Hear Our Voices, because our voices most times silent, and people don't hear it. But I want people to hear different people's voices: men, women, children, anybody who have lived through the family shelter in New York City. We want to be able to hear them and hear their stories. We also teach people about resources and different updates. So when they have City FEP updates, like the one they made on Monday, we're gonna be updating the podcast with that, because people, they might hear it, but they might not understand exactly what things are about. Right. So if we can break it down and get somebody who, because I don't honestly know everything, nobody knows everything, but we get a person on the podcast who knows something and who works in that particular area to come on and speak about that particular topic, so they can know, people can know more about it and things like that. If we want DV resources, things like that was coming up. We tell people about that also, because a lot of people are out here, they might hear about it, but they don't understand how to navigate anything. People don't understand how to navigate, City FEPs or Housing Connect, and we come on to make sure they can understand it and ask questions they might want to ask and they can't ask themselves. I make sure I ask, because I don't know everything, so I make sure I ask the people who do know things so people can learn about it. So that's what the podcast kind of comes about, and that's how it ended up being born. I want to say it's been like a year and change right now, so hopefully it helps people in the community.
It sounds amazing, though, and I think you touched on one thing that's vitally important, that the systems can be in place, the programs can be in place, but if folks don't understand how to navigate those systems and programs, then it really doesn't even make sense. Lyndon, I have a question for you, right? I'm really curious as to how you would advise the city, right? What do you think the city can do differently or better for homeless youth?
That's a whole conversation that, to be honest, it's just not look at youth as a young person that just wants to start trouble or just doesn't know where they're going in their life and just doesn't have a purpose, but instead help a young person to heal from that trauma, to help guide them in that direction where they do have a purpose. Because when I was in the system, I'd never envisioned myself speaking up and advocating for youth. Before this, I was an assistant manager at Domino's Pizzeria. Prior to that, I was a former Job Corps student. So you don't know where your life is going to take you. But I hope that with the work that the administration is doing and the work that DYCD is doing in terms of the Housing Our Neighbors blueprint and the opportunity to start with the home blueprint and actually being intentional in our services for youth, that we come together and collaborate with my board, and that you also take the voices of other youth that are throughout the city and hear their voices and concerns as to what they need, and not foreshadow them and leave them in the dark.
Thank you so much for sharing. I have a question for the entire panel. Anyone comfortable answer any question? What city services or systems or institutions actually helped you most, or what were the ones that you used?
I could jump in with that. Thank you. Okay, so to speak on which services that helped, I have to speak on which services I sought. As a disabled person on a fixed income needing a fixed rent, I was told to go to the shelter and I would be fast-tracked. 2 years later, 744 consecutive days and nights, I was finally housed. Was trying to get to Coney Island, Brooklyn, and I was put in Fordham, Bronx. For clarification purposes, my experience was under the last administration. The work I started doing with advocacy was based off of that. I stayed in shelter for over 2 years just trying to get my housing package done when I came in with all the qualifying documents in hand. That 2 years was 2 years too long. While the 2010E was effective, and I still am currently housed there today, 5 years later, my mental is stable, my recovery is stable. I am most stable when I am housed. There are secondary characteristics of homelessness that homelessness creates, where mentally you will regret backwards, in your recovery you will revert backwards because of the consistent trauma you're experiencing. You can't build without foundation, you can't branch out without being able to grow roots. I sought help with City FEPS vouchers because I'm quote unquote high functioning. I am eligible for that as well. I caught walking pneumonia to get the appointment for that voucher. We were told if we went outside the building and waited there from 4 a.m. until they opened, we would be given a ticket to come back in 2 months because they didn't have appointments. I did that entire process to wind up with a $1,200 voucher, which was 85% of fair market rate. Which is then when I met my good old friend Shams over there. We both worked on getting that voucher up to fair market rate. Also, just to speak on the systemic oppression, at the time, if you had a voucher, you were not allowed to seek employment. If you got a job, you would lose your housing. So we got that changed up to, at the time it was $2,000. Now you can make $5,500. So you're getting to the point where you will be able to elevate yourself on the way out, but not many people were ever informed of those policy changes. I then went to affordable housing, and I was told, quote unquote, I am too poor for low-income housing because I'm on disability and I'm not permitted to work with I could win the lottery was the other option. I say all of this because the things that I searched, if they did exist, they were majorly flawed. And at that time, the administration would not take an appointment with us, let alone see the insight and the value that we provided. Today, I can honestly say that I am optimistic and I do have hope because that's a different scenario than when I was experienced. Our voices are heard, we are asked, and that's why we are here today. So I do have faith in the changes that are being made, in hearing from the people with the firsthand experience, and increasing staff at home base, and policy changes that are being made to city FEPs, some already, some that are in the works. I have faith in the new pilot for supportive housing to fast track persons like myself that would have been able to jump over that pass. Because I want it to work, I will highlight the difference between on-site and scattered site, and that's based off of level of care needed. Normally, I'd recommend the least restrictive environment. However, that would not benefit all people. So if you're going to do straight to housing, straight to supportive, then it needs to be on-site supportive that provides the case management in the building. For others that have their own providers, they can go to that. I know I'm saying a lot, but this is really important to me. And these are the types of things that the administration asks us because we have these experiences. We're able to provide that kind of information. So the services I saw may not have necessarily all been able to help, but I am quite optimistic about the changes being made, and I hope I answered that question.
Yes, you did. I appreciate it. I think one of the most important things that you touched on is that it was a repeated process, right? You constantly had to reach out and you faced barriers, but you continued to reach out to figure out exactly what housing was going to look like for you, right? And in the process, changing policy. And I think that's one of the things we are doing at Destination Tomorrow. We don't call it a shelter system, but we have a housing model. And our housing model is for TGNC folks who are former or current sex workers, 25 and over. And we were very intentional about the folks that we house because they experienced some of the same issues that you experienced when they sought housing out and tried to navigate the systems. But one thing we do is we tie it in with our wraparound service. We believe in economic empowerment in the Bronx, right? We don't want you to give us a Metro card and a pizza and let us hang out for the day. We actually want tools and services. So one of the things that we do is everybody has to do one of our programs, whether it's the GED, whether it's job readiness, whether it's professional development, whether it's financial literacy, because I can't try to prepare you for housing if you don't understand how to sustain that housing. So for my panel, what would be a policy or a program or a suggestion that you would have for this administration? And then you mentioned some of the things that they're beginning to do, but what else do you think is necessary in order to make successfully transitioning from homelessness?
2 words: resources and opportunities.
Resources and opportunities. I need those two, I'm just saying. Anyone else want to share?
I'm going to say that a program that worked for me, a service that worked for me was when I was in DYCD. It was the Transitional Independent Living Program. For being a youth at a young age, not knowing how to properly I knew how to do my laundry, but the resources there, like if you don't know how to do your laundry, if you don't know how to cook, if you don't know how to do food shopping, basic life skills is essential to transitioning a young person into independent housing. So that was a very helpful component for me. And this is something that just has to go on unanimously, because we're housing people into apartments but we're not doing the transition efforts correctly because they don't have the proper support. Not a lot of people know how to pay their rent. Not a lot of people know that once they move into an apartment, they have to put their name into all the utilities that they're there. Not a lot of people know that if they overstand an income threshold, that their housing may change. So the transitional support is something that is crucial to changing our system, because oftentimes we're quick to house, but we don't look at the after component. Aftercare support is essentially important in our system, and that's something that we failed on that we need to improve on.
I think one of the problems I think that we have, I think we should implement for like as young as probably 14 or 15, to be honest. Before he even said that, just my idea. When you're in high school and my mother, if you don't know, my mother is Jamaican, so I'm first generation born here, and my mother, we were poor, but I didn't know I was poor. I grew up in Queens in a house, and we rented, and the lady was nice, and I thought in my mind the house was ours, but it really wasn't. But my mother didn't teach me key factors. I didn't know how to pay rent, as he said. I didn't know how to wash clothes. You would think that a Jamaican parent would teach you that. Other than washing by your hands, washing machines wasn't really a thing in a third world country unless we had the money for it. And my family came from dirt poor. I mean, red dirt on the floor, poor, no shoes, outside, poor. So growing up and not even knowing you're poor, when you get older, I'm like, man, I was poor and I didn't even know that was happening to me. And it's kind of crazy. I think they should implement, they have all these other things in high school. You could do this, you could do that. Why are you not teaching kids basic skills? How to write a check, how to do these things. These things they need in real life. I'm sorry, you need some algebra, you need some stuff, but other things you learn in high school, and then like, I'm not using that in real life. I promise you, a lot of things I did in high school, I didn't use it in real life. I'm in my 33. I haven't used half these things, and it's been over how many years? It doesn't make sense. But I need to know how to wash clothes, to do food. I'm not that great at that yet, so I'm just, I'm trying. We surviving though, I'm just saying. But basic things we should know how to do. How to balance a checkbook. How when you get your money, how much should go to this and that. And I'm still, as an adult, trying to figure that out. And my mother didn't have the time to do that, because she worked 2, sometimes 3 jobs just to survive in New York City. And that was now 20, 30 years she's been here. And it's like, now she's sick, but not the point. The point is that we need to learn these skills as we get younger, so when we get to be an adults, we're not failing. I shouldn't be in the shelter at 25 years old with my kid. It doesn't make sense. That shouldn't be a thing happening. Why? Because first of all, I'm not getting enough money at work because I'm on bed rest with these things. They should have programs for certain people who are pregnant anyway. That's a different story about that. But I think if you teach people certain things, skills they can keep forever, they'll keep it and they'll go on with that. And they'll teach it to their generation and their generation. But if you don't teach people nothing, they'll always be in poverty forever. And you don't want a society like that, because when you say you're great, but you're not great if your people are poor and in the streets and on the sidewalk sleeping. That's not cute at all, to be honest. But you need to lift the people up, get them off the streets, and get them proper housing, and teach them the lessons that they need to learn to be able to be a better person in real life. That's what I personally think. I don't know if that's a long answer, but that's what I got.
And just to highlight another component that we need for services in our system is mental health support. Like, one thing, we in a mental health crisis, let's be realistic. And a young person or an adult or whoever it is that is experiencing homelessness, they oftentimes develop diagnoses that they do not realize until they see someone, and now you realize, now I'm diagnosed with PTSD. Now I have general anxiety disorder. Now I have depression. Now, at whatever age that is, you have to learn how to cope with those things. And if we're looking at a systematic approach of transitioning a person from exiting homelessness to be sustainable and independent in their livelihoods, we have to focus on the component of their mindset first. Because they say once the mind goes, the body follows.
Right.
So our mindset is important and is crucial, and we need more access to mental health services across the board.
Go ahead.
Can I just add to that? Dismantling the congregate style shelter system and creating more of that safe haven type. There's a lot of trauma that exists in that setting. So now the stability you came in with has now reverted very far backwards. There's a lot of people in the streets that won't go into that congregate style because they've already had that trauma. So going more towards the safe haven style of a single room where you can go and sit in the back and lick your own wounds and get it together and things of that nature, that would also greatly help.
I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Coming from a person who, when I went into shelter, I had probably a mild case of depression. When I got into shelter, probably 5 or 6 months in, it hit me like a rock. I mean, I was working. I couldn't go to work as much. My daughter was with me, and I'm in the dark every night, every day in the shelter. Just most I did was eat and take a shower. I like to be clean, but it's very sad how you go in with one problem and you come out with 7 or 8 other problems. But I had my depression went bad, my anxiety went bad. It's like people, you're almost just left. You're left as a number. They don't care about you. They just leave you in the dark. And it's like we're people. I pay taxes because I'm working for the city, so you get half of my, not all of it, but you know some of your stuff. So it's like we need help. And people should honestly be in the shelter that long. Families should, I know, be 3, 4, 5, 6 years. Nobody should be in that kind of environment for that long. It doesn't make sense. I'm not saying that we're gonna register some people in the shelter in about 3, 4 months, but people cannot survive like that. Children cannot be in the shelter that long and have a good mind in school and be concentrating. All they think about, is a roach going to be on me? Is a rat going to be on me? Because these are what happened. These are stories I've heard. People are in the shelter and rats and roaches are on top of them. I live next to a shelter in Brooklyn, and the women's shelter in the metro, it looks a mess. We need to do better.
And this fiscal responsibility, the dollar tag to keep one person in shelter, you could let 2 people out. It's $4,000 a month to keep one person in shelter, but the voucher's $2,000. So it's costing more to keep them in that condition than it would be to allow them out.
Also moving to healing-centered approaches. Like, we're a place where we focus on trauma-informed care, but we don't focus on the livelihood of like finding peace within ourselves. So focusing on things like yoga, meditation, centering our balance, again, with the mindset is services that we can properly incorporate into our system as well, because we live in a city where it's a fast life. And if we always on a fast life, we don't slow down, we can't take time to process our thoughts.
I'm really glad that you all mention mental health and wellness, because I don't think we talk about it often enough, but I also think that we have to make sure that the providers are understanding those traumas that exist, right, and that they're also culturally sensitive when we bring folks into these spaces, so that they're not doing more harm than good. I want to talk about one common misconception, right, and I think one of them was that homelessness it equals street homeless, right? Those folks that just gave up on life and they don't care anymore, those are the folks that are homeless. When we all know that that's not the reality. What's another misconception that folks have about homeless people?
We don't work. We're not educated. Right.
Right. I mentioned my diagnoses, my identification, but I also did not mention that I graduated Phi Theta Kappa with my associates in early childhood. I'm matriculated enough to graduate in my BA in psych. Come spring, so these are the things that it's like, oh, well, they're just nothing but and then you fill in the blank. And that we're not whole people, and that we're the sum of all of our flaws, and then that's not the case.
The biggest misconception is our youth too. The misconception of a young person, they go into a system and a caseworker or whoever asks them, don't you have family to go to? I wouldn't be here if I had somewhere to go.
Yeah.
I think people think that shelter is like, I think the Taj Mahal. It really isn't. It's not a great place to be once you've been there. To be honest, I feel people think that we're just going there just to be lazy. We're not. We go there because we really need the help. Some people go there because of fires. Some people go there because they just need the help. They don't have family to go. Some people are literally taking up their kids, leaving their stuff behind because the person who's beating them behind at home, they have to run from them. People don't think about these problems. Domestic violence, people, I feel like they don't talk about it as much, but that's a big factor in New York City.
Thank you.
Men, women, you'd be surprised. And it's not only physical violence, it's people talking at you rudely. Somebody should not be calling you out your name. That's not a thing you should be having. You have a name that your parents have given you, that should be called. I personally think. You shouldn't be, you'd be surprised. People hold money over you. And it's your money that you work for, but they're taking the money away from you. It can be many different things, and we don't talk about it. We try to push it under the rug, put them aside of the shelter. No, these people need help. They need mental, there's so much different problems that they have, and we need to get on top of it instead of pushing it to the side and not helping these people.
Yeah. I agree.
Right. I was just going to say the community gets upset when there's a shelter because of the the curfews from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., rain, snow, sleet, heat, you're in the street, in the single shelters. So when the community sees, well, there's 200 people on this block, or things of that nature, they start thinking, well, they want to be there. Well, no, I most certainly do not. I can't work, I'm disabled, so there's no purpose to throw me out for 8 hours a day minimum because there's no place inside. So that creates a lot of conflicts within the community of thinking those people and what they're doing here. Well, they have nowhere to go, so yeah, they're standing on the block because they can't go back inside and they can't go to whatever you think they're supposed to be doing for the day. So that right there, I think, could be handled a lot better, and I think that's a major misconception.
To the crowd, I know we're all gonna get hyped because these are all lived experiences.
Right.
But if we can give the panel an opportunity to like really fully flush out their thought, I would appreciate it. The organizer in me is like one mic, but if we could all just like give them an opportunity. And one of the misconceptions we had when we opened our shelter in the Bronx was that because they were trans and gender non-conforming folks, they were all prostitutes. So we were gonna open a brothel. That was one of the rumors, that we were opening a brothel. That we were opening a brothel. The other one was that they were all trans folks, so that they were going to be predators on the children that were in the neighborhood because it was a school across the street. So we had to like really overcome some of those misconceptions. The beautiful thing is that we got an opportunity to work with the community board, right, and some of the other board associations, and now we rent our space out to them so that they can host meetings. So I guess they're not scared of us. So I guess they're not scared of us anymore. I love to use the word resilient, right? I think we're all resilient. We've overcome many, many obstacles. But what does it mean for you? What does the word resilient mean for you?
Oh, no.
That's good.
Go ahead, y'all go ahead.
Sam's ready to rap. I don't know about the rest of you. Everybody's ready to go. Resilient. Or if we don't want to define what resilience, what word would you use to describe yourself?
Yo, look, You, listen, let's go back in the questions. Come up with some better questions. Let's do this, because for me it becomes homeless porn. Let's come up with some better
Well, we don't want to do homeless porn. My point is to try to get your experience out. I'm not.
I hear that. But listen, my thing is this. We're going to approach this from the perspective of dignity. You know what I'm saying? We got past all the rough stuff. Let's just kind of go a little in a space where we provided solutions and stuff like that. You know, I just don't, like for me, I'm just telling you, the stuff be triggering because I have to deal with this all the time. And it's always like, yo, put your story on front page, this and that. There's so much more to this. I just don't think the questions are going far enough.
How far do you want to go with the questions? Because we can dig into because the reason that we don't go that far is for what you just said, because we don't want to trigger.
No, but don't worry about that because that's going to maintain the stigmas. Go ahead, come with the questions. Come with something that.
But again, the reason
all right, let's go like this. I'm gonna give you something. Let's talk about systemic, structural, and institutional racism.
You have the opportunity to talk about whatever you decide to talk about. We're asking about your live.
No. I'm asking you to ask me a question about systemic, structural, and institutional racism.
Tell me about systemic, structural, and racist institutions.
Okay, so let me tell you something. A lot of these issues that we have to deal with is deeply rooted in that. And so when you're looking at how we're dealt with, just look at the codification of our oppression. The laws are designed to keep us. The way even HRA and DSS, the city and the state, the way they design these policies is designed in a way that keeps us in an oppressed state. It keeps us in a perpetual cycle of poverty and dependence. So let's go in that direction.
Okay, this is what I'm going to say to respond to you, right? The panel that we just had spoke on all of those things. So this panel was about lived experiences, right?
Okay,
so
that's my lived experience.
You're asking me a question. You're not going to let me
I
finish
just say
answering
the
your
word
question.
that means something to me is not resiliency, it's persistence.
Thank you. because same as what you're doing, it could be triggering to folks as well. And I get that you want to get your point across, but you can get your point across as you answer the questions. So I'm not going to traumatize anyone else because you want to get your point across. You can speak about whatever you want to speak about. The last panel spoke about structural racism and how it impacts the systems that we're trying to eradicate. So if you're asking me for a solution, I would turn around and say the folks that you need to ask for a solution are in this room. Or you can pose a solution to the folks that are in this room without further traumatizing anybody that's sitting on the panel.
That's a good point. But the reason why I said that is because, like for me, sometimes it's about centering us in a dignified way. A lot of times when we called to come upon here, all we're called upon is to do is just say, look, my life has been so bad, this is what this is, and this is what that is. And that's cool. Like, we can go through that. But the other side of that is to say that also the deeply rooted things, because we know that too, we're the experts in that. The deeply rooted things that negatively impact us, we should have those discussions, or we should be a part of those discussions. Sometimes, in my humble opinion, sometimes the people that you put up here to address those issues, right, they never even experienced this stuff. They don't know what it's like. They ain't been through that.
But isn't that why it's important to allow them to speak about their experiences from their lens?
Yes.
Right, and that's what we've been attempting to do. But then the other thing is, for me, because before I became the executive director at Destination Tomorrow, I was also formerly incarcerated and formerly homeless. So I know how folks will bring you here to further traumatize you for their own purposes. As again, especially being a black person, I understand how folks bring. So that's not the point. My point in anything that I do is to have discussions that are rooted in solutions. Yes, we all know that what systems are in place. So it makes no sense to continue to talk about them. What are we going to do? What's the solution? So you get the opportunity through your lived experience to speak to them about solutions, and that's all I'm trying to get out of you.
I have something to say. When I was brought to the table, I was brought here by Shams. Shams is someone I met doing advocacy work, and both of us were speaking on a lot of the same panels about how we're not sleeping at night due to these issues. And one thing Shams has always said is about empowering. It's one thing to bring people and parade them around in front of the cameras, it's another to empower people. So he makes sure that any place his voice is, that whatever he's lacking, if it's a female voice, if it's a youth voice, if it's an LGBT, whatever voice it is, that he's empowering those individuals. So I like to just throw it that direction as opposed to the resilience direction.
I like that word, empowerment.
Right.
That's all that's about. It's about presenting us in a way that's empowering. Not that your question was wrong. I just know we have limited time. I specifically asked for specific questions. Well, I didn't ask for what type of questions, but I wanted questions posed to each individual on here in a way that would kind of center us, that we could speak towards that empowerment. So It's not for you. It's not. In other words, the questions you're asking is not bad. But I know we're having a limited time. I want to make sure that we are presented in a way that shows us an empowered state, but also that causes those that are in the audience to look at us in a way where they feel compelled to empower us. And so we, not to, go ahead.
No, I want you to finish, because I think you and I in some ways are saying the same thing, right? Because as a black trans man, I want to be empowered, which is why I keep centering that. They didn't give me a question about that. They didn't tell me to identify with that. But it's my purpose to be here to make sure folks know who I am in all of my lived experience. So all I'm saying to you is do the same thing.
Okay, gotcha. I'm just saying, I know we got limited experience. I didn't hear.
And we just wasted 15 minutes of it going back.
But you know what? This is important.
This is really uncomfortable.
You know why this is important? Sorry. You know why this is important? Because sometimes we have to define our agendas.
But sometimes, because now I feel like it's gonna be the Sham and Sean show. But sometimes I also feel like you have to take that upon yourself. If we waited for these same systems that are in place that don't know what we need and don't know how to respond to us and don't know how to center us, if we constantly are waiting for them to do that through questions or panels or whatever, we'll be waiting forever. So the whole thing is that when you're in a room, regardless of what room you're in, to make your point, whether the questions are, whether I'm answering the question or not, I am going to make my point while I'm here. And my point is always going to be rooted in solutions. What are we going to do to make sure when you speak about racial and justice and diversity and all of that stuff, that everybody is at the table, not just the chosen few? Or how are we getting rid of the gatekeepers? Those are the things that I want answers to. And I'm asking them. Y'all saw how I asked that question. So I'm asking that question now. I want you to do the same thing.
Okay, got you. Now we're on the same page.
Okay, so
It took a minute, but we there now.
So
We
since
there.
so since we're on the same page, right? We're gonna do this.
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna give you an opportunity, right, to send to the room. What is it that you want them to know that you feel like we have not touched on?
Well, like I said, I briefly glossed over it, but and listen, it's not personal to me. I'd rather really everybody else get to speak on that. But, just briefly, from my experience, it is those systemic things that really makes it bad for us. Like, if I was to deliver a message, that message would center around the codification of our oppression. I don't want to get it, because we're at City Hall, so we talk about these things all the time. But some of the things that we look at, and they could speak more to it than I can, some of the things we look at, simple things that could be changed, and we do have the power to change. The shelter environments. Just when you walk in, just how you treat it, how what the walls look like, the fact that there's no Wi-Fi in the traditional shelters for single adults and stuff like that. These are little things that really means a lot, and they could be changed. Just like you said, and like Linda speaks to all the time, the fact that for the seriously marginalized groups, into the subgroups of marginalized groups, how they are grossly neglected in so many different ways. And these are really things that if people really cared, they could use their power to actually change that. But we have to come into these spaces and say, you know what? It's a new administration, it's new people in, it's a lot of black and brown people too. It's a lot of black and brown people. So y'all know where we're coming from. It's like, look, we're not doing what we've been doing, because none of that's worked. What we're gonna do is tear all that up, and we're gonna do something that makes sense. So that's just my thing, but I think,
Would anyone else like to? Are you good? Anybody else want to answer the question?
I think what it is too is that I feel like they have so many rules that can block, and we make one rule and it seems like it's working for one particular group, and then we make another rule that kind of blocks certain people. I feel like we should have the rules the same for everybody, and making sure that we all can work towards the goal in the homeless shelter. Because this seems like, example, I feel like this is over it, but like example they were talking about earlier, the cliff. I finally made a little bit of money in their eyes. So now I have to pay for insurance, I gotta pay for all these things, and now I'm kick off the food stamps, I'm kick off for welfare, and I still have a child and I have a foster kid. So that being the case, it's like, can you wait till I get on my feet real good first before you can kick me off of this system that I've been on for a couple of years now? They need to do some things that can really help people and not make them go kind of slide back down to where they were before. That's what ended up happening to a lot of people. That's why a lot of jobs before I didn't take. I had a job opportunity to go for Con Edison, but I had to think about how much I'm gonna make, where my child's gonna be at that time, because they want me to be in Queens and I live in Brooklyn at 7:45. My daughter's daycare don't open up until a certain time, so it's like certain things you can't work with. If you make too much, you can't get childcare properly. You can't get the food stamps. They not only take out some of it, they take away all of it, and you only make it $2.50 extra. It doesn't make sense. It's like a lot of things need to be put out there, and it's like it can't be just the high ups who have never lived through this life, and people like us who actually been through, like, we need extra money. The reason why we need these extra things, and you could tell we live in New York City. We don't live in a place where it's like toilet paper is like $1.50. No, New York City is a high place to live, and I love living here, but it's very hard living in a place. For a person like me who can't see the greatest and who doesn't drive, I need to live in a place like this. It's like I can't live in a place where you need to drive everywhere unless I'm going to be doing Uber, and who has Uber money? Not me. So I have to make sure I live in a place where I can, and the sad thing about it, I don't even qualify for disability. So I'm like in the middle of everything. It's like, life is hard. But I made it, and I know people can make it, but we just have to work harder to work with everybody in every different intersection with everything. I'm a woman. As you can see, I'm black. So that's like two things towards me already, and I'm a mom. So that's three things. And I'm a single mom. I'm divorced. So it's like I have these things working against me. If we just kind of help me out in little, areas. Not only me, but other people here also on this panel. We can make other people's life in New York City and even America honestly better. I feel like it don't stop from like our city. California has a homeless problem. A lot of places have a homeless problem, so we need to work with, the whole thing. So that's kind of my tidbit.
Well, one thing I appreciate that the NYPD is here because, the youth all are looking at NYPD as someone they fear. So I would like to just change that dynamic. There was an instance a few months ago where there was an announcement that there's going to be more NYPD presence on the train stations. But, there was a youth that I worked with in broad daylight that was shot and killed over an altercation. That was a homeless youth. So I think, the collaboration needs to be shifted and geared towards the NYPD and the collaboration with youth and making it a safe environment where youth can feel that it's okay if they need services because they are on the street, that coming up to an officer, they're not going to fear being arrested. And if it hopping the turnstile, that instead of incarcerating them, that, we give them a warning or that we do an intervention, that there's an alternate intervention for our youth to protect them instead of locking them up.
Yeah.
But I'm just trying to do the right thing.
Say, well, last 30 seconds is
just to
yours.
expand a little past that. I was in a shelter that they called like a MICA, mental illness, chemical. Anyway, it was all cops and no counselors. And the thing is, I don't expect the police to be mental health professionals.
Yeah.
However, they shouldn't be the only solution. There should be a person that's trained in mental health from whatever type of medical angle. I used to say to them, I'm the resident, why am I the most qualified person here? And it's really, really sad that I was the only person with any psych history, period. So to have it only be policing of poor people or unhoused people, looking at them as if they're criminals, and it's not just the police, it's the entire system, community, everybody's like, oh, they're here, they want something. When meanwhile, people with mental health, disabled people are more likely to be the victim of the crime than the aggressor, and it's most likely the people that care for them. So when there's no reporting systems, when there's no where to seek out help and assistance, and well, you're one of those them there people, what you say has no value, or you must be high, or you must be crazy, or things like that. So the way that we're addressing homeless, unhoused people, if you look at this room, we've been able to command the stage for a minute now. We are quite competent, and I'm going to shut.
And we're going, and I was going to say, we have a minute too long. I want to thank you all for joining the panel, for sharing your lived experiences, for challenging the space and the room. I think we should always show up and challenge while we're here, what the purpose is, right? So, give them a round of applause.
Okay, we're moving on to our final panel. This panel is Microsoft and Ernst & Young, and you're going to hear from private sector companies on how they can serve citizens, society, and government to address root causes and immediate needs associated with homelessness. You'll see in your brochure, James Collins is not with us today, but we do have Greg McKay, who's Microsoft Global Health and Human Services Director and former Arizona Director of Child Safety. We have Danielle Barnes, EY Government Executive Director and former Tennessee DHS Commissioner. And we have Andrea Barnes, EY Global Human Services Leader and former Government Human Service Leader. The moderator is not Andy Pittman, but it is the beautiful Jodia Vanell, who's the Microsoft Client Executive.
All right. Do you need this mic? I think we're good. We're good. Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, I know that it is late in the day. Thank you. I know that it's late in the day, and I really appreciate everyone staying here. So give yourself a round of applause for being here all the way. First and foremost, we want to thank Commissioner Jenkins and his entire team for inviting Microsoft and EY to be at the table to have this great conversation. Today was so enlightening. And I'm going back to reflect a lot, right, on all of the things that we heard during the various panels. But with that, we'll start it all up. So I'm Jody Avenel, client executive at Microsoft. I, along with some of my team members over here, lead the digital transformation of all the agencies under Governor Hochul and Mayor Adams. So if anything is going on in an agency in respect to technology, we're usually at the forefront leading that. And I have this amazing panel of folks that serve in their capacity from a corporate perspective, but most importantly, and what we need to really focus on is that all of their experience in government that they bring to the table in the corporate environment. So with that, our topic is how can private sector companies serve citizens, society, and government to address root cause and immediate associated with homelessness. And how we're going to go about this is talking about some of the immediate needs that we can discuss and how we can address that, along with some of the root causes. And so with that, I'll let you all introduce yourself. Take it away, Andrea Daines.
Yes, it's great to be here. Honestly, it's really humbling to look around, to hear the stories and the experience and the expertise, and to have a moment to share some thoughts with you. I have 30 years in health and human services, 10 as a state employee in my home state of Illinois, and part of that was in child welfare, part of it in Medicaid. The last 20 years I've spent from a data and a technology perspective, really trying to enable and empower those agencies to do a better job for the people that they serve. And because the theme of this right out of the gate was keeping it real, I'll also share with you that I grew up in Section 8 housing with free lunches in school. My mom worked full-time in Walmart, raising me and my sister, so I don't carry those unfortunate stereotypes. And when we talk about the problem, I remember what it felt like to need some help.
So Danielle Barnes, and I too am just overwhelmed by the day. If we could just take a moment and reflect on the fact that each of you showed up and leaned in. And that is not to be taken lightly. So I served 16 years inside the state government for the state of Tennessee under two different governors as the commissioner for the Tennessee Department of Human Services. I tell people I'm a lawyer by training, and that was my first career. And why is that important? Because we talked about it a lot today, and we'll talk about it a little bit more. It's understanding where we can break policies, where we can change laws, how we can interpret them differently to better serve individuals. And so having had that experience, both as a lawyer and as the administrator of the programs, I think has been very helpful. And so the lens I'm going to talk from today is going to be a lot of, man, I wish I had known.
Yeah. Well, amen, right, Patricia? You said it earlier today. My name is Greg McKay, and I spent 28 years in government before joining Microsoft. I spent 21 years in police work in Phoenix, Arizona, where I investigated major crimes against children for many, many years, where I became a foster parent of a victim of very brutal crimes that I investigated. And she was 4 then, she's 22 now, she's in nursing school, so people can and do recover, which is a blessing. I retired as a homicide detective, and then I was called upon to serve the last governor leading criminal investigations for the state's crimes against children. And then the next governor was elected, and I was appointed to be the commissioner of Arizona's Department of Child Safety, which is the child welfare system there. And I had the distinction of being the worst ranked system in 50 states. And I was blessed to recover that to top ranking, fortunately, by a lot of great work. So I heard a ton of pain and passion and energy and leadership and policy in this meeting so far today. And I really didn't want to be in the last panel of the day. I thought I was in the way of happy hour, as in the way of traffic. And everybody would leave by then, but I'm glad I heard all that I did. I got the perspective from lived experience and leadership from a lot of great people. And so I'm really glad to maybe wrap it all together into how do you operationalize that? How do you take all of these great ideas and policies and will, and you turn them into action that works for people? Because what I heard a lot of today is breakdowns in policy and practice and coordination and connectivity among disparate systems working together for the benefit of people. So thank you for listening today. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you for that, Greg. I think you stole my thunder because I was going to ask the panelists if you can talk about, one thing, a reflection, something that came out. For me, it was personally the mention by Senator Prasad about community engagement. There's a way to address some of these things with dignity, and it's by working closely with the community and bridging that gap a little bit more so that we can address all homelessness in New York City. Andrea, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, two key things popped out for me. First, from the mayor's opening comments, when he talked about Henry Ford and, if someone would have asked him what they wanted, they would have said, build faster horses. And it's just a recurring theme in human services. We do things the same way we did when my mom applied for benefits, only with a lot longer wait times. And I don't know how you all got here transportation-wise, but I don't think anybody printed out MapQuest directions anymore. If you remember, for those of us old enough in the room, now we have other ways that are more effective and efficient. We have real-time interface to know what traffic looks like and how to walk and what's the fastest path. That tech is available, so I want to see us bring it over. And when I was speaking with Khadijah before we had even the panel one, we weren't talking 5 minutes, and she brought that up from her perspective of lived experience. She said, the government knows so much about me, but I have to say the same things over and over again. I have to supply the same information over and over again. So I think for me, I loved everything I heard, but the piece that was missing is how do we modernize what we're doing and the experience that individuals have when they're interacting with government.
Danielle, thoughts?
Yeah, so Andre and I were actually talking about this earlier today. I am one of these people, so judge me if you want to, but every year at the beginning of the year, I pick a word. That it's going to be my word to live by. And 2022, like many of us, we had lots of trauma in 2020 and we've been rebuilding. And so my word for 2022 was believe. And if you look at, am I even on? Oh, thank you. Is that better? Yes. So my word for 2022 was believe. And if you notice, if anybody has been close to me, I wear this word around my neck. It means so many things to me. It means believe in whoever your higher power is, believe in making change for good, and then believe in people. And so why is that important? And back to your question, it struck me as so very impactful that the mayor's first words were believe that we can do it. Believe in the people. Believe we can change structure. And that for me says we are in the right space at the right time for the right reasons, and change is going to happen because we believe.
Greg, I know that you mentioned a couple of things, but final word, what were your thoughts and reflection for today?
Well, I think hearing about the number of children in shelter here in New York City hit home for me. I just mentioned Arizona was the worst ranked system in America, and one of the main reasons why is we grew our foster care population by 93% in the 5 years prior to my appointment. And that resulted in just tragic consequences across the system. Namely, I went to a shelter which was established for 72-hour emergency placements. And I looked at all the children's name in the book, and they had been there for 2, 3, and 4 years. So when I heard that here today, I tried to hearken back to those days and what we did about it. So I want to talk a little bit about the war room approach we took in Arizona. It just wasn't good enough to sit in the office at 10 o'clock at night after an awful day and say, well, we're the worst in the country. I had to know why. So knowledge became power for us. And we constructed a war room approach to solving our problems, whether it was criminal backlogs or foster care or wait lists for drug treatment or behavioral health care or whatever that might have been. We informed ourselves from tip to tail on what was truly wrong with that organization, with our state, with all those systems. And then we went about solving those problems. And a lot of that was aided through the use of technologies, which is why I came to Microsoft. Everybody asked me, why are you at Microsoft after the career you led? And frankly, I took part in so many reforms, policy reforms, practice reforms, budget reforms, and nothing really impacted them long term, like just doing more with less by utilizing some technology advancements and innovation. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome. Well, in the next series of questions, this will be targeted to the panel. You'll hear about poverty, children, and analytics. In every question that I ask, you will always hear the component of technology. Microsoft is a technology company, right? And so what we want you all to understand there are different ways to look at data and information. And we want to make sure everyone is empowered here, that you can take that information, you can visualize it so that it's very clear where the information is coming from. It's real-time information. And we want you to be empowered to be able to use that information to be able to make better decisions for what's happening here. So let's start with Danielle. So Danielle, you've had experience at being a HHS legal perspective, and so want to know some more about like cash assistance, how to get it, and what were the technology that you used to help assist in that nature.
So I love that you talked a lot about reform. We talked a lot about transformation inside of agencies and inside of government. And I think it really boils down to 4 different pieces. And I don't want to oversimplify it because it says easy does hard, but we've talked about so many of these pieces today. First is understanding our community, right? We can build technology, but if we don't know who we're building it for, and I don't mean on a surface level, I mean, are we doing it to make it better, easier, more accessible, so that we can have that information? We talked about things like the living wage, and that we're all literally one paycheck away from being in a situation ourselves of needing assistance. I often would tell people, nobody wakes up on a Monday morning just excited to come to a DHS office and sit for 7 hours and fill out 5 different forms. There's ways with technology to make that easier. Heck, they don't even need to come to our office, right? Which leads very simply into number 2. Number 2 is let's make better government processes. I mean, again, this is not one of these that I'm not standing on some kind of treatise coming up with something that you all haven't heard before. The mayor talked about, and he didn't say this, I'll say it, the technological world that we live in. Heck, we're in a world where we carry our phones 24/7. I am the person, I never want to talk to a human on a telephone. Right? And I'm annoyed if I have to press 0 to get to customer service. But yet, and still, we make people come in and talk to humans. We talk about making people tell their story over and over and over again. And I say it, but man, oh man, the panel before us said it best. You heard it directly from them. We talk about when you come into an office of DHS, how many times do you have to tell your story? So with technology, with our systems being able to be better connected, maybe we don't have to tell it at all. Maybe we already know it. Maybe we already know and have learned that you've been laid off or that you're facing eviction without you ever having said it. We need to be able to make it easier to do business with government. Now, I tell this story, and it sounds like a crazy story, but this is real. So part of my responsibility at DHS was to put money back into the community, right? Government can't do this alone. So we talk about philanthropy and nonprofits and really investing in community agencies. Right now, that's still equally as bureaucratic. That's equally as paper-driven. I remember finding a nonprofit agency in the community, doing fantastic work, had the trust of the community. We said, DHS goes and knocks on the door and says, hey, we want to give you $1 million to operate this program, to make it stronger. You know what they said to me? No, we don't want your money. We don't want the government's money because it's too hard to do business with you. So now we have a population of people who could be better served because we've made it more difficult. Number 3, we got to break those silos. We've heard it all day long. This is not a specific to social services issue. This is a government issue. We've got to make sure that collectively, the person that you're serving in the Department of Health and mental health is likely able to receive services in social services. They are likely able to receive services in housing. Why are we not talking to each other? And then 4th and finally, it's really tracking those outcomes. And I always would say we are in government information rich, but data poor. I tell people when I came to the department, I said, tell me how we're doing. And Andrea talked about data. I said, tell me how we're doing. First day, they put a book on my desk that was about this high, full of data. All the data I could possibly want in the world. And I said, okay, well, this is all very interesting. I'll read this, at night. I said, but how are we doing? Do we know that a person is better off because we touch them? Or do we just know that we touch them? And so information and technology can help us really figure out, have we made a person better? We talked about breaking generational cycles. We talked about, we call it the 2-generation approach. How do we know that we are able, through technology, it's through those outcomes that we can then break those cycles. So it's one of those, it's technology driven, but I'm going to go back to the end. It has to be person, people centered.
Thank you for that. But I will have to disagree with you on something. I am one of those people that press 0000 because I want to talk to a live operator. All right, moving into children. So Greg, this is for you. Tell us about your experience in terms of how homelessness affects children, including public safety aspects, and how technology, especially data visualization for leaders, can help address that.
Yeah, so we had 19,000 children in care when I started. And because of that number, we had multiple children sleeping in offices and in government workers' cars and in motels because we had no placement array left. Supply chain was completely exhausted. But over time, we ended up reducing shelter usage for children by 78%. We reduced foster care by 28%. We got down to group care for only 11% of all foster children, which was great. And really what led us into solving those things was going back and finding out what happened in the first place. And truthfully, what our knowledge that equated to power told us was that just a few years before, 4 words added to legislation subsequent to multiple child fatalities led to a 70% increase to the child welfare system in that state, which led to backlogs in investigations, children being taken from their homes, potentially not in a warranted manner because they were overwhelmed, and kids staying in the system in perpetuity. So, my point to all that is you have to truly know, what's wrong with your system deeply, and hence how to begin repairing that. And I know we're short on time, so I'll close out with something. I saw the mayor's task force regarding, solving street sleeping and encampments, and it's inclusive of 4 agencies, as I understand it: NYPD, Sanitation, Department of Homeless Services, Parks. And that's a great first step. But law enforcement has their system of communication, as does education, as does DHS, as does behavioral health, as does drug treatment, everybody. So if these systems that are supposed to partner are disconnected by way of their technology, how can they possibly win? And when they don't win, transitions that are critical, like the ones we heard up here last hour, failed transitions because of gaps between system partners, cause more and more and more blight and challenge. So I would say moving forward, it's critical to figure out how you bridge those partner agencies, respecting their individual missions and making them successful by way of technological advancements that we have today. And I think that that's really the key to bringing these multiple agencies together for best outcomes.
Yeah, so essentially breaking down data silos and bridging things together and making sure agencies are interconnected so that everyone is seeing the same information at the same time.
I want to say something to us. Everybody knows, commissioners, we've been in a room together. The issue that you guys don't see that I know, that they know, is there's legislation blocking this situation. When you're issued an OTDA number or you go to apply for welfare benefits here in New York City, the number has to come from Albany. That number legally cannot be shared amongst other agencies, let's say Department of Environmental Protection Services. So that they know, but they can't do anything because we need legislation, but I don't see anyone. We need legislation to write that so that that can be bridged so that all of this can be unified. They can't share that information with NYPD unless it's an emergency call or something.
But Paris, I agree, right? The lawyer in me says, absolutely, you're correct. But I'm also gonna push back on you too a little bit, because I without getting into like the very specifics of the law, one of our biggest issues as government is that somebody interpreted it that way back in 1982, right. and it has been the gospel ever since. And so one of our responsibilities is to constantly question. I mean, sometimes they tell me I sound like a bratty 2-year-old because it's why? Well, show me why, right? Because you have to keep pushing the bounds of the way that we interpret those laws. Now, I agree, some laws definitively need to be changed, and a lot of it is federal.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of interpretation that we have flexibility with. I know my lawyers are probably cringing a little bit, but that we do have a little bit of flexibility, and let's challenge where we do have that flexibility.
And just taking off my Microsoft hat for a second, that's where the advocacy work really comes in, right? Pushing each and every single person, getting up to Albany on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and making sure lawmakers are aware of these concerns. All right, so Andrea, let's move on to you, and we're going to focus a lot on data right now. Clearly, there are immediate steps to take for those who are unsheltered today. As EY's global lead for human services, have you seen any innovation or opportunity that leads to effective prevention strategies? Is there a way to reduce the number of people to find themselves without stable housing?
Absolutely, and I'll try to be concise because I know we're running a bit on time, but sorry for the echo. Back to the mayor's comments. He said, we keep talking about what to do when we pull people out of the river, but we need to go up and find out why they're falling in to begin with. And this may have gotten better. Got it. So I want to kind of pull forward that point and go back to the data question and the conversation. We have to challenge current assumptions. This whole day has been about challenging current assumptions. We can't just say, no, we can't do it and be done with it. And if I tell you about a project I'm aware of in 2 boroughs in London, where we've actually been able to demonstrate an effective reduction in new instances of homelessness from 40% to 0.4%, that's true, that's real, that's not an imagination, that's not I wish this is the way the world worked. We were able to aggregate data about individuals, all with a ton of privacy and security concerns. So this is all done very transparently, it's all done with access. Because by the way, caseworkers have access to a ton of information today, but they have to log into 7 different systems. They have to print out a bunch of stuff. They have to make a couple phone calls, and they get case files this big. And then with an 8-pound human brain, which we all have, they have to process all that information and try to understand what matters and doesn't matter, and how to most effectively treat and help a human being in front of them. We're not talking about sharing data irresponsibly. We're talking about aggregating it and giving it to the caseworker in a form that he or she can understand. And most importantly, because I love data and tech, I am a tech geek girl, but if it doesn't change the way we live, if it doesn't change the action that comes out of it, it does not matter. So when you give the caseworker this digested information, and that caseworker can do something different, now you've got something happening. And in London, 650, because we know a lot of the root causes. We know if somebody loses their job, if somebody gets divorced, if somebody has a critical health incident, we know a lot of times 2 or 3 of these things happening, you're seeing where this is gonna end up. You make that phone call, you offer that assistance up front. Somebody mentioned it earlier today. The programs that are available to people when they're unsheltered need to be available to them when they're on the verge of becoming unsheltered, so they can stay stably housed. And again, we collected the data. 40% of those who were not helped in advance ended up on the street. 0.4% of those who got the same programs, they just got them earlier, stayed safely sheltered. Think about the impact to the children, to the community, to the workforce when someone doesn't have to go through losing shelter. I could talk for hours. I'll pull me in.
Well, we really don't have hours. I saw that we have like 3 minutes left. So can you all on the panel just give me literally 10 seconds? What can be done to incorporate technology so that government can work better? 10 seconds, and I do have a surprise bonus question for you.
Gotcha. So get the information and inform yourself. Have virtual teaming options available. Have mobility for your workforce, and have documentation, translation assistance by way of computer that will force multiply people in a huge way.
Agreed. Equity is number one. We heard it over and over and over again. I may be the one that doesn't want to talk to a human, but my father-in-law doesn't want to touch a phone. And what we do want to make sure is that we don't leave anybody behind. Everyone is deserving of the same respect and empowerment that comes with services, and we need to make sure that they have access as well.
Super quick, we have to quit saying no because and start saying yes if. That's something I've been carrying around for years, and it's a great challenge in the middle of our conversations. Don't tell me no because, tell me yes if. And then the second thing is to expect and produce the same level of convenience for the individuals who need assistance that we all enjoy every single day in our lives. We get to do things on our phone apps. We get to auto enroll in things. We need to make that same convenience accessible. It is unfair to ask somebody in the middle of a deep crisis of life to navigate one of the most complicated systems that exists on the planet and to do it in a way that equates to 1982.
All right. And so the final thing is call to action for everyone in the room. One call to action from each of you that you would like for everyone in the room, politicians, commissioners, advocacy groups, NYPD. What do you want them to do?
Can I go first on that?
Of course.
Please, if you are responsible for a program in any way, shape, or form, put yourself on the other side of the table and go through the process that you make people go through. We have a foster daughter. I had to go through our systems. It was way different on the keyboard than it was on the whiteboard.
So her last name isn't Barnes, her last name is Danes, and I think they did that because we share a brain most of the time. So that was going to be my answer. My second, though, if I had to pick a number two, action. Create an action plan. Now we in government tend to come up with a lot of plans that get shelved, right? That's not going to work. We're past shelving. We've got to put things into action. We've got to have a concrete plan. We've got to put it in action. We've got to hold people accountable.
Yeah, either optimize or add processes that enable you to operationalize policy, or like you said, the laws are not good, the laws are in the way of progress. Advocate and take the knowledge that you have and go forth and advocate for change of those laws. That's what we did in Arizona. We changed the law and we reduced our system size by like 60% after we did that. Had to be informed first. Thanks.
Well, thank you all today for hosting us and for allowing us to speak. You can always follow up with us afterwards, but you can also catch us on LinkedIn, all of our names. Feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panel. Okay, and kudos to the room. We are on time. So at this time, we are going to welcome closing remarks by Deputy Mayor Ann Williams Isom.
I got my mask on, y'all.
Y'all gotta make sure y'all get boosted and everything, right? Everybody's got that little cold thing. Who's that over there? Department of Health? Y'all clapping? Y'all clapping for getting boosted? What's going on? What kind of day have y'all had? I was
just saying, people are getting little colds and stuff like that because we don't have our masks on. So remember to take care of yourself. I am Deputy Mayor Mommy for everybody. So I'm just saying. So I am going to, what does that sign say? Caring with New Yorkers with care and compassion. So I'm going to care for you all by not talking long. I'm going to be super short. I was very inspired by just the stuff I heard from this last panel, and my charge today is to remind you, give you a little recap of the day, and to give you a charge as you're moving forward. We already said it. I wrote down what the mayor said. Y'all been quoting him a lot. I got to go back and tell him they were quoting you. He said, we need to behave like we behave with care, or believe we care. That's deep. Not that act like it or whatever, but like really believe that we care. I think we should like really write that down and act like if you cared and if you gave a damn, how would you act? The next one is we need to think differently. And people say that. We've been hearing a lot about reimagine and all this other kind of stuff. Some people are good at being creative and imagining and others are not. But I think it's this kind of thing is like, what kind of world do we want that we know is not here right now? And can we even allow ourselves to think about it? I actually frankly think a lot of people, that's really hard to do. It's like a little cute thing that we say right now, but challenging yourself every day, every morning, I don't know, just say to yourself, write down something like what would be different and how would we look at that? I heard someone say today, how do we lift people out of poverty? Did we talk about that? Lifting people out of poverty? Probably give them what they need in order to be healthy and safe. I heard that Dan Teet said, we know how to solve poverty. Is that true? Hello? Do we know? Or you think people don't know? Y'all got to talk to me. I grew up Catholic, but I'm in a Baptist church now. Do we know how to solve poverty or not? And so why don't we do it?
It's not lucrative.
Okay, that's one thing. What's the other thing? Because we don't have permission?
You don't have the will?
We don't have the will. What else? We can't dream? Greed. Oh, y'all see, they with the lucrative and greed. What about you people right here? Okay, that's interesting. So we should think about that more. Because if everyone keeps on saying, we know what we need to do, why don't we do it? And how do we all benefit from keeping the system the exact way it is? I guess we all get to keep our jobs, right? And so do we just need to think about it a little bit because that came up. I heard that Chris Quinn said poverty is intergenerational. And so we should stop trying to think about solving it in little bits, but we need to think about how we would solve it. When I was at the Harlem Children's Zone, that's what we said our mission was, right? To end generational poverty. And then I heard y'all had my BFF here and she gave the keynote. How was she? You know why? Because birds of a feather flock together. That's my girl. I heard that she said, imagine something more than what is. Again, she's trying to push us to do that, and that's not easy for us. The way that I usually say that is, how would we design a system if we were designing it for people we love? That's the way I wake up in the morning. I know when I see my children's face, y'all say, but y'all need to say that to yourselves tomorrow morning. How would this look differently if I was designing it for people that I cared about? I wouldn't let ACS look the way it does. I wouldn't design homeless services in the way it was. I wouldn't do a lot of things. And so maybe that's my way to imagine. So what's the thing that you need to encourage yourself so that you can see that differently? I didn't start by saying, we talk about people, and I heard that we had a wonderful panel of people with lived experiences. But what I love about that is that we all have lived experiences, right? Some of us can hide it more because I get to come up here and say I'm deputy mayor. I don't get to say to you, I grew up in a household where there was domestic violence. And that we know that 40 or 30% of the folks or families that are in domestic violence are in shelters right now is because of domestic violence. And if we would look at issues like that, maybe we would be able to solve some of these. You giving me a hands up. Thank you, sister, right? Maybe we'd be able to solve some of these. You know how my mom kept us out of foster care and out of shelter? Because she had a job. So she was able to work. She had family and friends. Well, she didn't actually have family because she was an immigrant from Trinidad and Tobago, so she was by herself. But she had neighbors that called and helped us, and so that she raised the four of us and kept us out of a homeless shelter. Talk about there but for the grace of God. So I guess maybe that's a message to all of us that use our titles to hide what our stories are. We all have a lived experience. We could either leave it at the door or we could use it in all of the decisions that we made. Amen? Amen. All right, let me get to my official remarks. Okay, what else? I think that's all good. And I still got 2 minutes. Okay, I want to make sure that these past 11 months have been so interesting. And we have talked about street homelessness issues and how to engage service providers in the corporate sector and NYPD. But I'm glad that in those 11 months, we have not gotten stuck in philosophical discussions, right, Gary? Like, we've had a bend towards action. We built on the foundation of the discussions just like you all are having today. We reflected, we conversed, and then we acted. And importantly, we then adjusted along the way. I think the mayor talked about mistakes and that we can't be afraid to make mistakes. And I think he said that that's how he wouldn't be mayor now if he hadn't been making the mistakes, right? Y'all have to think about that when y'all read the newspapers and everybody's like, y'all keep on doing this wrong or whatever. But the truth of the matter is we are trying because we love the people that we serve, and we're not just gonna sit back and maintain the status quo. This is really important work, and I just want to thank the folks at DSS for this inaugural Poverty and Homelessness Symposium. I have a question. When did y'all get time to plan this in the midst of everything that else has been going on?
Where's Jamal?
Yeah. I know y'all are surviving on fumes, so I do not know how you did it. It was a wonderful day, so congratulations to all of you. Can we give it up to Commissioner Jenkins, please? All of the panelists and the speakers for today were fantastic. As a city, we know that we have a lot of work to do, and the discussions held at this symposium were meant to eliminate the challenges we face, but also to highlight opportunities. In addition, we hope that we can start to change the way we talk about poverty, expand our way of thinking, and commit to including those who experience poverty and homelessness directly in our efforts. So I don't really mean just invite them into the room every now and then when we say we want to have a something, and just be like, oh, let me check that box, I got somebody. I want to challenge us all to think about, everybody in this room who is in a leadership position, to commit to enhancing your agency and your organizations with authentic engagement with individuals with lived experience. Do I get an amen to that? Yeah. Including serving on your organization's boards, in paid staff roles, such as peer navigators, or specialists. The other thing I want to ask you about is, as winter approaches, we are reminded of our unsheltered brothers and sisters. And while this administration is invested mightily in resources, we know that there's still going to be people today, tonight, that are living on the streets. You all know this, but on Tuesday, January 24th, is when we're going to be conducting our annual Hope Count. And so this is a point-in-time survey undertaken in the winter that helps the city estimate the number of unsheltered New Yorkers. The results gathered through the surveys provide the city with valuable information, and I just want to invite whoever here would like to participate to join us for that. As we work to address the unsheltered homelessness across the city, one person at a time, this is a great opportunity to participate in an extraordinary citywide effort. So if you have volunteered before, I encourage you to sign up again. But if you haven't, I want you to go to nyc.gov/hope. And I think you can begin to register starting on Thursday, November 17th, which is tomorrow, which is, guess what?
It's open today.
Oh, it's open today. You messed up my thing, though. I wanted to talk about tomorrow, which is my 58th birthday. Hello, Black Don't Crack. It's true. Very true. She said, oh my gosh, what? Oh. Okay, all right. Thank the Lord. Thank you, Scorpio. All right. So I'm sitting down. What time is it? Is it 5:29? Oh shoot, I'm 3 minutes over. Okay, so as we enter the holiday season, I do so filled with renewed hope. That's what I also wanted to leave you with, right? I'm the deputy mayor that talks about love and talks about hope and talks about radical empathy, because that's what we need to do. That's gonna be the difference. It's not a program, I love the data folks, it's not that. It's can we love the people that we serve so that we go to extraordinary efforts to make sure that this gets done. That's what we need if we want to end generational poverty, finding every family and child and individual a safe and stable home. So let's do this work together and those goals and enlist ourselves and our colleagues in this effort, and keep an open dialogue with stakeholders across the city. Give us a little bit of grace and patience as we work together. And I think we'll do what Jennifer said. We'll imagine a world that isn't right now, but if we can't even imagine it, I promise you we can't get there. Thank you so much for this day.
Congratulations for this first inaugural conference. I want to take a moment to allow the room to give Commissioner Jenkins and his team a round of applause.